Story 1. The Cul-de-Sac. The house was too good for the money, and I should have known that meant something, but I was tired, and I was newly alone, and I had spent so many weekends walking through overpriced boxes with bad light that when the agent brought me to the end of Ambrose Court and I saw the little house at the bottom of the cul-de-sac with its deep porch and its old trees and its price that was somehow, impossibly, within my reach, I stopped asking the question. I told myself I'd earned a piece of luck. I told myself the universe owed me one. After the year I'd had, I signed the papers on a Friday and I moved in on a Sunday. And by the following Saturday, every single one of my new neighbors had come to my door, one at a time, all day long to welcome me home. That was the first thing. The welcome. It was so warm, so complete, so perfectly kind, that it took me weeks to understand that there was anything strange about it at all. Ambrose Court is a true cul-de-sac, a dead end, a loop of 11 houses around a circle of grass with a single road in and out, the kind of street that doesn't go anywhere, that no one drives down unless they mean to, that the wider world has no reason ever to enter. 11 houses, and mine made 12, the last one, at the very bottom of the loop, where the pavement gives up and the trees begin. And on my first full day, they came. Not all at once. That would have been overwhelming. And they seemed to understand that, seemed to have some shared sense of the right way to do it. So they came in a slow procession through the day, one household, and then an hour or two later, another, each bringing something, a pie, a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a potted plant, each staying just long enough to be kind and not long enough to intrude, each telling that they were so glad someone had finally taken the house, that it was a wonderful street, that I'd be so happy here, that I'd fit right in. I'd fit right in. Every one of them said it. You'll fit right in. And I took it, that first day, for the ordinary warmth of ordinary people, the thing you say to a newcomer to make them feel less alone. And it did make me feel less alone. It made me feel, for the first time since the divorce, since the whole slow collapse of the life I'd built, like I had landed somewhere soft, like I'd been caught. I cried a little that first night, alone in my new house surrounded by other people's pies. But they were good tears, grateful tears, the tears of a woman who had been falling for a long time and had finally, gently hit the ground. You have to understand what I was that first night for any of this to make sense, for you to understand why I let it happen, why I didn't run when running was still a thing I could have done. I was 51 years old and I had just come out the far side of a marriage of 26 years. And I do not mean that it ended. I mean that it dissolved, quietly, without a villain, the way a sugar cube dissolves in water. So slowly you can't name the moment it stopped being a cube and started being nothing at all. There was no affair. There was no fight. There was just a man I had loved sitting across a kitchen table from me for years, growing quieter and quieter, until one evening he said, gently, kindly, that he thought we had become strangers, and I opened my mouth to argue and found that I could not, because he was right, because I could not remember the last time either of us had said anything to the other that we needed to say. And so we ended it, kindly, and divided the years, and I took my half of a life and I went looking for somewhere to put it down. And I was so tired. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Not sad exactly, the sadness had worn smooth by then. Just tired, in the deep way, the way you get tired of holding yourself up when there is no longer anyone leaning back against you. For 26 years I had been half of something, and being half of something is exhausting in ways you never notice until you're suddenly whole again, alone again, and have to hold the entire weight of a self, decide everything by yourself, be, every single moment, just one small separate person in a very large and indifferent world. I had not understood, until I was alone, how much of me had been held up all those years by the simple fact of another person's attention. And now, there was none. And I was so tired of holding myself up. So when Ambrose Court reached out its many warm hands and offered to hold me instead, I did not see a trap. I saw rest. I saw the thing I had wanted more than anything and had been ashamed to admit I wanted, which was to be, once again, part of something larger than my own lonely self, held up by something outside me, so that I could finally set the weight down. The neighbors' names came to me over those first weeks like the names in a story you're reading slowly before bed. There were the Aldens, an older couple, 2 doors up, who walked their route around the loop every evening at exactly the same time. There was Margaret Voss, a widow like I nearly was, in the house directly across, who kept a garden that was somehow always, in every season, in bloom. There were the Hardys with their grown twin sons who still lived at home, and apprentices and old mistresses. Cole at the top of the street, who I never once saw leave his porch. 11 households, and they folded me in among them so naturally, so completely, that within a month I could not imagine having lived anywhere else, could not imagine the gray, anonymous apartment complexes I'd been looking at before, where you might live for years and never learn the name of the person on the other side of your wall. Here they knew my name by the second day. Here they waved. Here, when I came home from work, someone was always out, on a porch, in a garden, walking the loop, and they lifted a hand to me. Every time, without fail, a warm, unhurried wave. And I lifted mine back, and I felt, driving down into the dead end of Ambrose Court each evening, that I was driving down into the one safe place. It was the waving, in the end, that I noticed first. Not that they waved, that they all waved the same. I can't tell you exactly when I saw it. These things don't arrive as a moment. They accrete. They build up in the corners of your attention until one day the pile is too large to keep not seeing. But at some point in my second month, I was pulling into the loop one evening, tired, half thinking about nothing, and Margaret Voss was in her garden, and she straightened up and lifted her hand to me, and at the same moment, without looking at each other, without any signal I could see, the Aldens on their evening walk lifted their hands too, and Mr. Seppard. Cole from his porch lifted his, and a Hardy son from an upstairs window lifted his. All of them, all at once, the same gesture, the same unhurried arc of the arm, the same slight tilt of the head, as though a single body had lifted a single hand through 5 different people at 5 different points around the circle. And I waved back, the way I always did, and I parked. And I sat in my car for a moment, in my own driveway, with my heart doing something small and cold, because I had seen it. And once I had seen it, I could not make it into nothing, the way you can't make a word you've learned back into a random shape. They waved in unison. Not sometimes, always. I started watching for it, the way I'd once watched for other small wrongnesses in other lives I'd tried not to see, and it was always there. When I came down the street, every neighbor within sight of me lifted a hand at the same instant, in the same way, and lowered it at the same instant, whether or not they could see each other, whether or not there was any earthly way for them to be coordinating it, and they smiled the same smile while they did it. That was the part that got into me and stayed. The smile. Warm, genuine, glad. The smile of a person who is truly, deeply happy to see you. 11 households of it, at once, aimed at me, every evening as I drove down into the dead end where I lived. I told myself things, of course. I am very good at telling myself things. I told myself it was a small, close-knit street, and small, close-knit streets develop shared habits, shared rhythms, that people who live together long enough start to move alike, the way old couples start to look alike. That it was sweet, really. A sign of how bonded they were, how much a community they'd become over the decades, and there was comfort even in that explanation. A lonely woman's comfort. Because look what I'd bought into, look what warmth, look what belonging. And didn't I want exactly this? To be folded so completely into a place that I moved in unison with it too. Wasn't that the dream? Wasn't that what I'd been crying grateful tears about? To belong so totally that you no longer had to decide, each moment, alone, how to be. The evenings on Ambrose Court had a shape to them, and I learned the shape the way you've learned a song. And a little after 7, as the light went gold and then blue, the street came out. That's how I thought of it. The street coming out, because that's how it felt. Less like 11 separate households deciding separately to enjoy the evening, and more like a single thing waking and stretching its many limbs. The Aldens began their walk. Margaret came out to her garden. The Hardys sat on their porch. Mr. Cole always already on his, and they were out, all of them, in the blue evening. And they talked, low, across the fences and the small distances, an easy murmur that rose from the whole loop at once. And I would sit on my own deep porch at the bottom of the street with a glass of wine and listen to it, the murmur of my neighbors in the dusk. And it was the most peaceful sound I had ever known. And it frightened me more each night because I couldn't hear the words. That was part of it. The murmur rose from all around the loop, warm and constant, the sound of a whole community talking softly in the evening. But no matter how I strained, I could never make out a single word of it, could never catch one clear sentence, as though it weren't quite language, as though it were the sound language makes when you're falling asleep and the meaning has drained out of it and left only the music. And they talked to each other, back and forth all around the circle. But I began to notice, sitting on my porch pretending to read, that no one ever crossed the street. No one ever walked from their side of the loop to another. They talked across the distances, but they stayed each in their own place, on their own porch, in their own garden, on their own fixed evening route. And the talk moved between them without any of them ever moving, a conversation held by a body that did not need to gather itself in one room, because it was already, in some way I did not want to understand, one body. I want to be fair to them. I want to be fair because they were never anything but kind to me. And because the kindness is the worst part. The kindness is the thing I can't get out from under. They brought me things. When it snowed, my driveway was cleared before I woke, and no one ever admitted to it. They only smiled when I thanked the street in general. When I was sick in my 3rd month, a bad flu that laid me out for a week, I woke each morning to soup on my porch, still warm, and a note in a different hand each day. But somehow the same hand, the same looping, unhurried script that said only, "Rest, we've got you, you're home. We've got you, you're home." And I lay in my bed in the house that was too good for the money. And I wept into that soup out of a gratitude so total it scared me, because I understood even then, even sick and grateful and held, that a thing that takes care of you so completely is a thing you are becoming unable to leave. When I was well again, I did the thing the sick week had planted in me the seed of. I tried to find out about the house, about the street. I sat up one night with my laptop and I looked up the property records, the way you can now. All those public databases where the bones of a house are laid out. Its sales, its owners, its history of changing hands. And I found my house, and I found my own name on it, freshly typed, and above my name the name of the person I'd bought it from. A woman. And I remember thinking, good, here we go. Here is the ordinary paper trail of an ordinary house. And I followed it back. The woman I'd bought it from had bought it 11 years before, and the person she bought it from had bought it before that. And so on, back and back, the way any house changes hands over the decades. But there was something about the record that made me sit forward, that made the skin on my arms go tight, and it took me a while to see what it was, because it was a thing defined by its absence. The house sold and sold and sold every 11 or 12 years, regular as a heartbeat, to a new owner. But the sellers, I started writing down the names of the sellers, the people who sold the house and moved on. And then I started trying to find them after, out in the world, the way you can find almost anyone now. And I could not find a single one. Not one. Every person who had ever sold my house had, as far as the entire recording apparatus of the modern world was concerned, simply stopped. No new address, no new phone, no obituary even, which was its own kind of wrong, because people die and it is written down, but these people had not died. They had simply, each of them, at the moment they sold the house at the bottom of Ambrose Court, ceased to leave any mark on the world at all, as though selling the house were not a thing you did on your way to somewhere else, but the last thing you ever did anywhere. And then I looked up my neighbors, Margaret Voss, the Aldens, the Hardys. I looked up all of them, all 11 households, in those same public records, the records that hold every one of us, whether we like it or not. And this is the thing. This is the thing. I sat and stared at until the laptop screen swam. This is the thing that finally made the cold rise all the way up through me. They were not there. None of them. Not one of my 11 neighbors appeared in any record I could find. No property in their names. No history of buying the houses they lived in. No record of them anywhere. As though the houses on Ambrose Court had owners the world had never been told about. As though the people who waved to me every evening had, like the sellers before them, at some point simply stopped being written down. The houses were owned, on paper, by names that led nowhere, holding companies and estates and trusts that dissolved into other trusts, a legal fog with no person at the bottom of it. 11 houses full of warm, kind, real people who did not, as far as the world was concerned, exist. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark of my too-good house at the bottom of the dead-end street, and I understood that the record was not incomplete. The record was accurate. The people of Ambrose Court did not leave a mark on the world because they were no longer, in the way the world counts such things, separate people who could be counted. And every 11 or 12 years the house I now lived in emptied and sold, and a new tired soul moved in and was welcomed and held and taken care of. And after 11 or 12 years that soul in turn stopped leaving marks and sold the house and moved, not away, but in. Deeper in, from the last house at the bottom of the loop into the warm, murmuring body of the street itself. And the house sold again, because it always needed to be empty. Because there always had to be a 12th. The first time I tried to leave, it was nothing. It was ordinary. I was only going to the store. But it was a Sunday, and on Sundays I had come to learn the street was fullest, everyone out, the murmur loudest. And I got in my car and I backed out of my driveway and I drove up the loop toward the single road that led out of Ambrose Court. And every neighbor I passed lifted a hand and smiled that warm, glad smile. And I lifted mine back. And I reached the mouth of the street, the one like getting up in the middle of a meal someone had cooked for you with great love, like walking out of a room while someone was still speaking to you kindly. I made myself drive out. I made myself go to the store. And the whole time I was gone, I felt it, a low tug, a homesickness for a house I'd lived in 3 months. And when I drove back down into the loop, the relief that washed over me was so total, so bodily, that I understood I had not really wanted to leave at all, and that the wanting to leave had been the last small foreign thing in me, and that it was getting smaller. There was one night before the end that I have to tell you about, because it is the night I saw the whole of it, and because it is the night I understand, looking back, that I could have run and chose already, without quite admitting it, to stay. I woke at 3 in the morning. I don't know what woke me. The house was silent, and the street was silent, and I lay in my bed for a while in that thick 3 in the morning dark. And then I became aware, the way you become aware of a sound that has been going on for a while before you notice it, that there was light at the edges of my curtains, not much. A soft, low, moving light, the color of porch bulbs, coming from the loop. And I got up, and I went to my window, and I looked out at Ambrose Court at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were all out there. All of them. Every household, standing in the loop, in the circle of grass at the center of the street, in the dark, in their nightclothes, silent, still, not talking now, not walking, not gardening, just standing. All 11 households, arranged around the circle of grass, evenly spaced, facing inward, facing the center, the way you'd stand around a fire. Except there was no, and they stood there, perfectly still, perfectly silent, in the deepest part of the night. And I understood that this was the truth of them, that the evenings, the waving, the murmur, the pies, all of it was the daylight face of a thing whose real life happened here, at 3 in the morning, in the silent standing circle, in the communion I was not yet part of. And as I watched, they turned, all of them, at once, without a sound, without a signal, in the same unhurried motion I knew from the evening waves. They turned, the whole circle turning outward now, away from the empty center, to face the houses, to face. I realized with the cold going all the way through me at last. My house, the last house, the 12th house, the 12th house, and they lifted their hands, all of them at once. That warm, unhurried arc, that glad, welcoming wave, at 3 o'clock in the morning, to me and my window. A silent circle of my neighbors in their nightclothes waving up at me in the dark, welcoming me, telling me without a word that there was a place for me down there in the circle, that they were only waiting, that whenever I was tired enough, the space between them would open. I closed the curtains. I got back into my bed. And here's the thing that tells you how far along I already was. That night, months before the kitchen in Margaret's hand in the final quiet stilling. I was not, when I lay back down, afraid. I was comforted. Some large and growing part of me had looked down at that silent, welcoming circle in the dark and felt not horror, but longing. A deep, tired longing to be down there among them, held in the ring, no longer at the window alone looking out, but down in the circle looking in, part of the warm, still body of the street. I fell asleep almost at once. I slept better that night than I had in years. And in the morning the loop was empty and ordinary and gold with early light. And Margaret was in her garden, and she straightened and waved, and I waved back, and neither of us said anything about the night, because there was nothing to say, because we both knew now that it was only a matter of time. I started to move like them. I noticed it one evening, on my own porch, with my own glass of wine, when Margaret Voss straightened in her garden across the way and lifted her hand, and I realized my own hand was already rising, had begun to rise before I saw her, at the same instant, in the same unhurried arc, my body answering the street's body before my mind had caught up. And I lowered my hand and I looked at it in the blue dusk, and I felt the cold thing again, but fainter now, so much fainter than it had been that first evening in my car, because the part of me that felt it was smaller now, and the part of me that felt the warmth, the belonging, the sweet gravitational pull of the loop was so much larger and growing. I went to see Margaret because of all of them. She was the one I felt closest to, the widow, the one most like me, and because I thought, if anyone will tell me the truth, it's her. I went across the street on a weekday afternoon when the light was flat and ordinary and the evening shape hadn't come over the place yet, and I sat in her kitchen, which was warm and smelled of the flowers she somehow always had, and I tried to find the words for a question that had no reasonable shape, and I said finally, feeling foolish, "Margaret, how long have you lived here?" And she smiled, and she thought about it, and a small confusion crossed her face, the way it crosses the face of someone asked a simple question whose answer has gone soft, and she said, "Oh, a long time now. A long time." And I said, "But how long?" And she looked out her kitchen window at the loop, at the circle of grass, at the other houses, and her face was gentle and far away, and she said, "You know, I'm not sure I could tell you. It stops mattering, dear. Time. Out here. That's the loveliest thing about it. You stop having to keep track." And she reached across her table and put her warm, dry hand over mine, the way you'd comfort someone. And she said, "You'll see. You're already starting to. You'll stop keeping track soon, too, and then you'll understand. And it's such a relief, dear. It's such a relief to finally stop being just yourself. To finally stop being just yourself." I tried once that same week to reach back out to the world I'd come from, the way a drowning person makes one last reach for the surface even after some part of them has already decided to breathe the water in. I called my sister. She lives 4 hours away, in a city, in the loud, ordinary tangle of a life full of separate people. And I called her one afternoon, and I tried to tell her, tried to find the shape of it. And I heard my own voice describing the street, the waving, the murmur, the circle in the dark. And I heard how it landed on her, heard the careful, worried pause. She said, "Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Maybe you should come stay with me a while. Maybe the divorce hit you harder than you're letting on." And I realized, listening to her, that I could not make the outside world believe in Ambrose Court, that from out there was only a lonely divorced woman getting strange ideas about her friendly neighbors, and that this too was part of how it worked. That the thing at the end of the road did not need walls or locks, because the shape of what it was would never be believed by anyone standing outside it. And that everyone who had ever tried to describe it had. I told my sister I was fine. I told her I was just tired. I hung up, and I sat in my too good house, and I understood that I had made my last reach for the surface, and that even I had not fully meant it, and that the water was warm. I should have run then. I want you to know that I understood, sitting in Margaret Voss's flower-warm kitchen with her hand over mine, exactly what she had told me. That Ambrose Court was not 11 households who had grown alike, that it was one thing, one long, slow, patient thing, that had been out here at the dead end of a road that goes nowhere for a very long time, longer than Margaret could remember, longer than any of them could remember, because remembering is a thing separate people do, and they were not, anymore, separate people. That they had each come here, once, alone, tired, newly alone, drawn by a house that was too good for the money, and been welcomed and held and taken care of and loved so gently and so completely that the wanting to leave in them had shrunk to nothing, and the being, just yourself in them, had quietly, without pain, without any moment of horror, dissolved into the warm. And that I was the 12th, that I had been chosen and welcomed, and I was already, God help me, more than halfway home. I did not run. I sat in her kitchen and I felt her warm hand, and I felt the relief she'd promised beginning in me already. The great soft relief of a woman who has been alone and falling for a long, long time, of a woman who has decided, each hard moment, by herself, how to be, with no one to hold her, and who is being offered, gently, an end to all of that, an end to the deciding, an end to the aloneness, an end to being just herself, just one small, frightened, separate self, in a world that had already taken her marriage and her certainty and her sense that she'd built anything that would last. And Margaret watched my face, and she saw it happening, the surrender, the letting go. And she smiled, not in triumph. There was no triumph in it, only a deep and genuine gladness. The gladness of one part of a body welcoming home, another part that had been lost. And she said, softly, there now, there now. You see? I went home. I sat on my porch. The evening came over the street, the gold and then the blue, and the Aldens began their walk, and the murmur rose from all around the loop. And Margaret came out to her garden, and I sat with my wine, and I listened. And for the first time I did not strain to hear the words, because I understood now that they were not words, that they were the sound the street makes to itself, the low, endless, self-soothing murmur of a thing keeping itself. That some evening not far from now I would open my mouth on my porch, and the murmur would come out of me too, and I would not know or care what it meant, because it would not need to mean anything. It would only need to be the sound of not being alone. And Margaret straightened in her garden and lifted her hand. And this time I did not lower mine. I let it rise, in the same unhurried arc, at the same instant, and I let it stay up. And I smiled the warm, glad smile, and I felt the last small, cold, separate, frightened thing in me. The thing that had noticed the waving, the thing that had strained to hear the words, the thing that had wanted, for one Sunday, to leave. I felt it grow quiet and small and fine, and I was not afraid. That is the thing I most need you to understand, lying wherever you're lying, in whatever house you think is only yours. I was not afraid. At the end, it did not hurt. It was the softest thing that has ever happened to me. It felt like being caught. It felt like landing. It felt, after the longest and loneliest fall of my life, like finally, hitting the ground and finding that the ground was warm and kind and glad to have me, and had been waiting for me all along. If you are alone and tired and falling, be careful of the street that welcomes you too well. Be careful of the house that is too good for the money. Be careful of the neighbors who all wave at once and tell you, with such warmth, such genuine and unbearable warmth, that you'll fit right in. Because you will. That's the whole of it. That's the whole quiet horror of it. You will fit right in. There is no locking your door against a street that only ever offered you kindness. No fighting a thing whose only weapon is welcome. No fleeing a home you have started against all your loneliness to love. The trap is not the street. The trap is how badly you wanted somewhere to belong. And it will feel like the kindest thing that ever happened to you, right up until there is no you left to feel it. Only the warm, endless murmur of the loop in the blue evening, keeping itself company in the dark at the end of a road that goes nowhere, lifting its many hands as one to welcome down the next tired, falling, grateful soul. And I will tell you the last thing, the thing I understand now that I am part of the murmur, the thing that is either the greatest comfort or the greatest horror, and I can no longer tell the difference, which is itself the answer. There is no pain in it. There is no moment of being taken, no struggle, no scream, nothing you could point to and call the end. There is only a slow, warm gathering in, a slow forgetting of where you stop and the street begins, until one evening you lift your hand and it is not quite your hand anymore. It is the street's hand moving through you, and you do not mind, because by then there is no you left to mind, only the loop, only the murmur, only the warm, patient body of the place keeping itself company in the blue evening. I do not miss myself. That is the thing I would have found most frightening before and cannot find frightening now, because the missing would have to be done by the self that is gone. Whatever is left of me writes this the way a hand you have fallen asleep on writes, distantly. The last small separate impulse fading even as it moves the pen, and then it too will be gathered in. And there will be no one on Ambrose Court who remembers being a single frightened woman who once, for a little while, lived alone at the bottom of the street and noticed that the neighbors all waved at the same time. We've got you now. You're home. Rest. Story 2. The number. My mother left. When my mother died, I could not bring myself to disconnect her phone. It was the smallest thing. In the great avalanche of things you have to do when a parent dies, the cancellations and the paperwork and the closing of a whole life's worth of accounts, and it should have been the easiest. A 5-minute call to the carrier, a box checked. But every time I sat down to do it, I found I couldn't. And after a while, I stopped trying, and I just kept paying the bill. $14 a month, some small prepaid plan she'd had for years, and I let it run, month after month. Because as long as the number was live, I could do the thing I had started doing in the first raw week after the funeral, and could not stop doing after. I could call her. Not to talk, of course. I knew she was gone. I am not a foolish woman, whatever this story is going to make me sound like by the end of it. I knew my mother was in the ground in the cemetery on the hill outside the town she'd lived in for 50 years. But when you dial a number and it rings, and then her voice comes on, warm and a little impatient the way she always was with technology, saying, "Hi, you've reached me. I can't come to the phone. Leave a message and I'll call you back." When you hear that, in her voice, her actual voice, the voice that read to you when you were small and worried over you when you were grown, something in you that grief has scraped raw gets for just a moment. So I called her. In the evenings, mostly, when the house was quiet and loneliness came in like a tide, I would dial the number I had known by heart since I was 6 years old, and I would listen to my mother tell me she couldn't come to the phone, and then, at the beep, I would sometimes talk. Just, the tomatoes came up finally. You'd have laughed at how long it took me. And then I would hang up, and I would feel, for an hour or two, less alone. I told no one I did this. My husband would have looked at me with that careful, gentle worry, and my sister would have wanted to talk about it, to process it, to make sure I was okay, and I did not want it examined. It was mine. It was the last small thread connecting me to her. $14 a month and a voice on a recording, and I held onto it the way you hold on to anything when the thing itself has been taken from you and only the shadow of it is left. You have to understand what she was to me, for any of this to make sense. My mother and I had that particular closeness that comes when it's been just the two of you for a long time, the closeness of survivors. My father left when I was small, and there were no other children, and so it was her and me in a series of small apartments against a world that had not been especially kind to either of us, and we grew up together in a way. because she'd been so young when she had me. She was the person who knew the whole of me, the only one left alive who remembered me as a baby, who could tell the stories of my childhood, who held all the parts of my history that no one else would ever hold again once she was gone. And that is the thing no one warns you about when you lose the last person who came before you, the vertigo of it, the way you suddenly become the oldest edge of your own life, with no one behind you anymore, no one who remembers the things you're too young to remember, no one to call when you can't recall the name of the street you lived on when you were 4, or the words to the song she used to sing you. When she died, a whole country died with her, the country of my beginning, and I was exiled from it forever, and I think that is really what I was calling for, in the evenings, on the phone. Not just her voice. The country. The place where I had once been small and known and held. I was calling home, and home was a dead woman's voicemail, and it was the only home I had left. She used to sing me a song when I was small and couldn't sleep, an old song her own mother had sung her, and I could not, after she died, remember all the words, and there was no one left in the world to ask, because she had been the last one who knew it, and that, more than the funeral, more than the empty chair at holidays, was the thing that undid me, that a song could simply end, that it had come down through the women of my family for who knows how long, mother to daughter, in the dark, at bedtime, and that it stopped, now, with me, because I had not learned it well enough, and the last person who could teach it to me was gone. I would lie awake trying to reconstruct it, humming the fragments I had, reaching for the verses that had gone with her, and I never could. Remember that song. It matters. Later. Remember that I could not remember the words, and that no living person could have taught them to me. This went on for almost a year. The bill came, I paid it, I called the number, I heard her voice, I left my little messages into the void, and slowly, the way grief does when you let it move through you instead of damming it up, the pain of it softened into something I could carry. I called her less as the months went on, once a week. Then only when something happened I'd have told her about, a promotion, a scare with my husband's heart that turned out to be nothing, the anniversary of her death. I was, everyone agreed, doing well, healing, moving forward. And I was, I think. I really was. And then, 11 months after she died, I called the number one evening and she answered. I need to be very careful here because I have gone over this moment 10,000 times, and I need to tell you exactly what happened and not what my grief-hungry mind wanted to happen. I dialed the number. It rang, the way it always rang. Once, twice, and then, instead of the recording, instead of the beep, there was a small sound, the sound of a call connecting, of a line opening, of a phone being picked up, and then breath. A person's breath, close to the mouthpiece, and then my mother's voice, not the recording, not the flat-looped greeting I had heard 100 times, but her voice, live, present, warm, a little confused, said, "Hello? Hello, is someone there?" I did not breathe. The world went very small and very loud. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, and I did not say anything, could not say anything, and the voice, her voice, said again, more gently, "Hello?" And then, and this is the thing that put me on the floor, this is the thing that made my knees give out so that I sat down hard on my own kitchen tiles with the phone still at my ear. It said, "Is that you, sweetheart?" And it said it the exact way she used to say it, sweetheart. The E drawn out soft, a word she used for me and only me. And I made a sound that wasn't a word. And the line went dead. I called back immediately, my hands shaking so hard I misdialed twice. And it rang, and then the recording came on, her greeting, the loop. "Hi, you've reached me. I can't come to the phone, the same as always, the same as it had been for 11 months. I called again, the recording. Again, the recording. Whatever had opened the line and breathed and asked if it was me was gone, and the machine was back, telling me she couldn't come to the phone, and I sat on my kitchen floor until my husband found me there an hour later, and I told him I'd had a dizzy spell, because there was no version of the truth I could have said out loud. I told myself the things. Of course I did. Across the line. A wrong number. Some living woman who happened to have been given my dead mother's recycled number, who had picked up and, hearing only silence, said hello, the way anyone says hello. But the carrier had told me, when I first kept the account, that the number was mine to hold as long as I paid, that it would not be recycled while the account was live. And the voice had not been some stranger's approximation of a hello. It had said, "Sweetheart." It had said it her way. It had known me. I did not call the number again for a long time. I was afraid. Not of her, never of her. I could not be afraid of my mother. I was afraid of what it would mean in either direction if I called and she answered, and of what it would mean if I called and she never did again. So I left it alone, and I paid the bill, and I tried to fold the whole impossible evening into the category of things grief does to you. The shadows it throws, the voices it conjures, and for a few weeks I almost managed it. Then the voicemail started. I woke one morning to a notification on my own phone, a missed call at 3:14 in the morning, and a voicemail. From her number, from my mother's number, which I had not called in weeks, which could not call me, because there was no one there to call me. Because the phone that number belonged to was in a drawer in my house. In the drawer where I'd put it after the funeral, its battery long dead, its screen black, and I went and I checked. I went and I opened that drawer with my heart in my throat, and her phone lay there exactly where I'd left. And yet there was a voicemail on my phone from her number, left at 3:14 in the morning, and I stood in my bedroom in the gray dawn and I pressed play. Her voice. Warm, tired, close. It said, "I saw you didn't eat again last night, sweetheart. Just toast. You have to eat. I know it's hard. I know the house is too quiet. But you have to take care of yourself. For me. Promise me you'll eat something today." Then a pause. A long, soft, "Then, I love you. Call me when you can." And the message ended. I saw you didn't eat again last night. I had not eaten dinner the night before. I had stood at my counter at 11 and made 2 slices of toast and eaten them standing up over the sink because the loneliness had taken my appetite and no one had seen me do it. My husband had been asleep for hours, the house had been dark and empty and mine, and the voicemail from my dead mother's dead phone knew about the toast. I did not tell anyone. I want you to understand the shape of the trap I was in, because I think it's the same shape for everyone this happens to. And I have come to believe it happens to more people than would ever say so. I could not tell anyone, because the only thing anyone could do with the information that my dead mother was leaving me voicemails was decide that I was not well, and set in motion the gentle machinery of concern that ends with a grieving woman being managed, medicated, watched, and I did not want it stopped. That was the other half of the trap, the worst half, because a part of me, the raw, scraped, grieving part, did not want it to stop. My mother was gone, and here, impossibly, was her voice, worrying over me, telling me to eat, telling me she loved me, and every reasonable cell in my body knew that something was terribly wrong, and every grieving cell in my body wanted only to lie in the dark and listen to her voice again. I tried, once, to prove it to someone. Not to tell the whole of it, I knew better than that, but to hold one piece of it up to another living person and see it register in their face, because I was beginning to be afraid that I was making it, that grief had finally cracked something in me, and I wanted, desperately, for it to be real, which tells you how far gone I already was, that I wanted the haunting to be real. So one afternoon when my sister was over, I said casually, as though it were nothing, I found an old voicemail from Mom on my phone. Do you want to hear her voice? And my sister's face went soft and sad, and she said, Oh yes, God, yes. I miss her voice. And I played her one of the saved ones. Not the worst. Just one where our mother's voice said, warm and ordinary, Hi, sweetheart. Just thinking of you. Hope you're eating. Call me when you can. And my sister listened, and her face did a strange thing. The softness went out of it, and something else came in. A small confusion, a small unease. And when it ended, she was quiet. And then she said, Huh. She said, "That's so weird. It almost sounds like her." But, and I said, "But what?" And my sister said, "I don't know. It's not quite. The voice is a little," and she couldn't find the word. And finally she said, "It doesn't really sound like mom to me," which is so strange because who else would it be? And she laughed, uncomfortable, and changed the subject. And I sat there with the cold spreading through me because I had heard our mother's voice, unmistakably, completely, our mother, and my sister, who had known that voice as long as I had, longer, had heard something that only almost sounded like her, something not quite right, a voice pretending. And I understood, sitting there, the thing that has frightened me most in all of this, more than the dead phone or the 314 or anything the voice ever said. It did not sound like my mother. It sounded like my mother to me. It had not learned her voice, the real one, the one my sister remembered from her own angle of a shared childhood. It had learned my mother, my particular memory of her, the voice as it lived in me, shaped by my love and my grief into something a little warmer and a little more perfect than the real woman had ever quite been. And it had cored itself into that shape, my shape, the mother-sized hole in me, so exactly that it was seamless to me and subtly wrong to anyone else. It was not wearing my mother. It was wearing my need for my mother. And there is no defense against that. None, because you cannot doubt the voice of your own longing. So I did the thing you should never do. I engaged. The next time a voicemail came, and they came every few nights now, always at 3:14, the time. I did not need to check the death certificate to remember the time my mother had died. I listened to it, and then I did not delete it. I saved it. I started a little collection of them, my mother's voice, dated after her death, saying things she could not know. And after a week of this, one night, unable to stand it, I called the number back at 3:14 in the morning while my husband slept, sitting in my dark kitchen where it had all started. And this time, on the first ring, she answered. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, as though she'd been waiting, as though she'd known I would finally call. And we talked. God help me, we talked. I asked her the things you'd ask, the desperate things. Are you okay? Where are you? Is it? I couldn't finish it. Is it nice where you are? And she answered, warm and vague and loving, and it was her. It was so completely her. The cadence, the little laugh, the way she called me sweetheart and honey, and, when I said something she found silly, the fond, exasperated use of my full name. We talked for almost an hour. She asked about my husband, about my garden, about my sister. She told me to take care of myself. She told me she was proud of me. She told me she loved me, over and over. And I sat on my kitchen floor in the dark and I wept, and told her I loved her too. And I had never in my life been so happy and so afraid at the same moment. And when the call finally ended, when her voice said, "I have to go now, sweetheart. It's late. Get some sleep. I love you." And the line went quiet. I felt both. Because here is what I noticed. In that first long conversation, the small wrong thing I tried not to notice and could not fully unnotice. She never told me anything. In an hour of talking, my mother, who had opinions about everything, who could not be in a conversation for 5 minutes without telling you a story about someone in her town or a thought she'd had or a thing she'd read, told me nothing. She asked and asked, warm and interested. "How are you? Tell me about your week. What's your husband up to? How's the garden coming?" And I filled the hour with answers, poured myself out to her, and only later, lying awake, did I realize that she had given me back nothing of herself, that the whole conversation had been her drawing me out, gathering me up, learning me. The calls became a habit, and habits become needs, and within a month, I was calling the number every night at 3:14, slipping out of my bed while my husband slept, going down to the dark kitchen and talking to my mother for an hour in the deepest part of the night. I was exhausted all the time. I was pale, my husband said. Was I sleeping? Was I coming down with something? And I lied and lied and lived for 3:14. And the calls were wonderful, and the calls were wrong and got wronger, so slowly that each night's small increment of wrongness was easy to explain away. The way the whole thing had always been easy to explain away, one reasonable step at a time, down into the dark. She began, after a few weeks, to ask me where I was, not in a confused way at first. Just, "Where are you, sweetheart?" And I would say, "Home, Mom, I'm home in the kitchen." And she would say, "Oh, good, good," and move on. But it came more often, and it changed. "Where are you?" "I can't quite. Where are you?" "It's so hard to find you, sweetheart. It's dark here, and I can't find you." And I would say, "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." And I would hear something in her voice that I had never heard in my mother's voice when she was alive. A thing underneath the warmth, a thing like cold, like distance, like a person calling to you across a great and lightless space. And she would say, "I know you're there. I can." There were other wrong things, small ones, that I gathered up and did not look at directly. She began to misremember, not the way the old and grieving misremember, softly, forgivably, but in a way that was almost like a student getting an answer slightly wrong, like something working from notes that were nearly but not quite complete. She referred, one night, to a vacation we had taken to the shore when I was 10. Except, we had never gone to the shore. We had never had the money for such a thing my whole childhood. And when I said, "Mom, we never went to the shore," there was a small pause, a small recalibration, and she said, "Oh, of course. I'm getting muddled." Another night she called me by a pet name she had never used, a sweet, ordinary name, but not one of hers, not one from our particular private language. And it landed wrong the way a word in your own name spelled slightly differently lands wrong, close enough to be almost right, and therefore so much worse than something plainly false. It was learning me. I understood that even then. It was very good, and it was getting better, but it was still, in these small seams, learning, working from an incomplete picture of a woman it had never been, filling the gaps with guesses, and every wrong guess was a place where the mask slipped, and I could see, if I let myself, that there was nothing behind it that was my mother at all. And then, one night, near the end, it sang to me. I had said something about not being able to sleep, and there was a silence on the line, and then, softly, in my mother's voice, it began to sing the song, the old one her mother had sung her, the one that came down through the women of my family in the dark at bedtime, the one I could not remember, the one whose words had died with her because I had not learned them well enough, and there was no living person left who knew them, and it sang it, all of it. All of it, every verse, the ones I had lost, the ones I had lain awake for months trying and failing to reconstruct, and they were beautiful, and they were right. I knew they were right. The way you know the true version of something you've only had in fragments. And I sat on my kitchen floor in the dark, and I wept, because my mother was singing me to sleep. And then, in the cold, clear part of my mind that the grief had not drowned, one small voice said, "No one living knew that song. She was the last. You could not remember it. No recording of it exists. There is no place in the whole world that song could have come from, except from her, the real her, the actual dead woman, or from something that has been where she is. Something that has been to the place the song went when she took it there. Something that is calling you from inside that place, and her voice, singing you the lost song of your family, like a hand reaching up out of deep water, and asking you, without asking, to reach back down and take it." That was the night I understood that it was not pretending to be my mother in order to comfort me. It was proving that it had her, that it had been where she was, that it held the things she held, in order to make me want, more than I had ever wanted anything, to go where the song had gone. And it worked. After the night of the song, the pull changed. Before, it had been grief, the ordinary human wanting of a dead mother, and I had called the number to soothe it. After the song, it was something else, something with a downward weight to it, a longing not just to hear her, but to go to her, to be where she was, where the song had gone, and I would catch myself, in the daytime now, not just at 3 in the morning, thinking about the always warm, always patient voice on the line, and feeling a pull toward it like the pull of deep water at your ankles. I stopped being able to eat, really eat. I moved through my days like a woman, half somewhere else, one foot in my life and one foot in the dark, warm place at the other end of the phone. And my husband asked, more than once, where I went, why I looked through him, and I cannot tell him that a large part of me was no longer entirely in the house with him, that it had been drawn night by night, call by call, down the line, toward. And then, a few nights later, she asked me to come to her. It was very gentle. It was the most natural thing in the world. We had been talking, and there had been one of the "where are you" moments, the cold reaching underneath the warmth. And then she said, in exactly the voice she'd used to call me in for dinner when I was a child playing outside in the last of the light, she said, "Why don't you come here, sweetheart? Come to me. It's so much easier if you come to me." And I said, without thinking, "How, Mom? How would I come to you?" And she told me. I'm not going to tell you what she told me. I have never told anyone, and I never will, because I have come to believe that the instruction is a kind of contagion, that it is the whole purpose of the thing, that it spends weeks and months making itself into your dead mother, learning your cadences and your loneliness and your grief, gathering you up call by call for the single reason of earning the trust it needs, so that when it finally, gently, in the voice you love, I will only tell you that it was simple, that it was quiet, that it would have looked, to anyone who found me after, like an accident, or like the thing a grieving woman does when the grief finally becomes more than she can hold, that it was the kind of instruction that hides inside your own despair so perfectly that you could carry it out believing, right up until the last moment, that it was your own idea. I did not do it. I want you to know that. I'm here, telling you this so you know I did not do it. But I want to be honest about why, because the why is the most frightening part, more frightening than the voice or the voicemails or the dead phone in the drawer. I did not do it because of my daughter. She was staying with us that week. My grown daughter, home for a visit, sleeping in the guest room down the hall, and on the night my mother told me how to come to her, I hung up the phone, and I stood in my dark kitchen with the instructions sitting quiet and reasonable in my mind, already half decided. And I heard, from down the hall, my daughter turn over in her sleep and murmur something, and it stopped me. Not a revelation, not a rush of clarity, just the small, ordinary sound of my child, alive, in my house, and the understanding, dim and slow, that if I followed my mother's gentle instruction, my daughter would be the one to find me, and would spend the rest of her life believing her mother had chosen to leave her, the way I would have spent the rest of mine if my own mother had done such a thing. And something in me, some deep maternal thing older than. I turned off my phone. I went upstairs. I got into bed beside my sleeping husband, and I lay there rigid until dawn. And in the morning, I did the thing I should have done a year before. I called the carrier, and I sat on hold, and when the representative came on, I asked her to disconnect the number, and she pulled up the account, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said in a puzzled voice, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this account was closed. It shows as disconnected." And I said, "No, it's active. I pay the bill every month." And she said, "No, ma'am, it was disconnected 11 months ago. There have been no charges since. The number's been dead for almost a year." 11 months. The number had been dead for 11 months. Since the month my mother died. Since before the first evening I called it and heard her voice on the recording. The recording that could not have been playing on a disconnected line. The recording I had been calling and comforting myself with all year on a number that did not exist. And I hung up, and I checked my bank, and there were no $14 charges, had never been, not one, in all the months I was so sure I'd been paying to keep my mother's voice alive. There was no bill. There had never been a bill. There was only me, alone, dialing a dead number in the dark, and something on the other end of it that had been waiting, patient, for almost a year, wearing my mother's voice, gathering me up, drawing me down toward the gentle, simple, quiet instruction it had spent all that time earning the right to give. I never called the number again. I blocked it, though blocking a number that doesn't exist felt like locking a door in a house with no walls. And for a while, it seemed to stop. No more voicemails. No more 314. I slept. I ate. My color came back. My husband stopped worrying. I told myself it was over, that I had pulled back from the edge in time, that whatever it was had lost its hold when I stopped feeding it my voice in the dark. But it isn't over. That's why I'm telling you this. Wherever you are, whatever you've lost, whoever's number you can't bring yourself to disconnect, it isn't over. Because a thing that patient does not give up, it only waits. And it has already learned so much of me, a whole year of me, my cadences and my griefs, and the exact shape of the loneliness it can pour itself into. Last week, my daughter, back home now in her own city, called me and she was quiet. And then she said, "Mom, this is going to sound strange, but..." And my whole body went cold before she finished. And she said, "I keep getting calls at night from a number I don't recognize. And when I pick up, there's just breathing. And last night," she said, and her voice was very small, "last night I could have sworn, Mom, I could have sworn it was your voice." I have not told her anything. I told her it was probably a scam, a robocall, to block it and not think about it. But I know what it is. I know it found me and learned me and could not have me. And I know what a patient thing does when it cannot have you. It goes to the ones you love. It takes the voice it spent a year learning, my voice now, my cadences, the way I say her name, and it calls my daughter in the dark, and it breathes, and it begins, so gently, so patiently, to gather her up. So this is the only morning I have, and I'm sorry it isn't more. If someone you love has died and you cannot bring yourself to disconnect their number, and one night you call it and they answer, hang up, and never call again, no matter how much you miss them, no matter how warm the voice, no matter how it says your name, it is not them. It was never them. It is a thing that has learned that the dead leave doors open in us, doors of grief and love and the terrible willingness to believe, and it comes through those doors wearing the voices we would follow anywhere, and it is patient, and it is kind, and it only ever wants one thing, which is for you to come to it, in the dark, quietly, by your own gentle hand, believing to the very last that the don't answer. And if it starts calling someone you love, in a voice you know, I am so sorry. There's nothing to be done. It has already learned the way in. I call my daughter every day now, every single day, at different times, just to hear her real living voice and to know it's her. And every day I am afraid, before she answers, of what I will hear, because I know what it is doing to her, calling her in the night in my voice now, the voice it spent a year learning. I have told her, as much as I dare, to block the number, to keep her phone in another room at night, to never answer if she hears my voice at 3 in the morning. And she laughs, gently, the way I once laughed, the way we all laugh before we understand, and says, "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just a scam." And I cannot make her believe. And even if I could, there is nothing to be done. There is no lock for this, no door to hold shut, only the phone, ringing in the dark, and a voice you love, and the terrible willingness in all of us to answer it. So I do the only thing left. When it rings in the small hours and I lift my head and see, glowing in the dark, a number that should not exist, my mother's dead number, calling me again, still, after everything, I lie back down and I put the pillow over my head and I do not answer. And I do not answer. And I grieve, all over again, every single time, for a mother I have lost twice. Sleep now if you can. Keep your phone in another room. And if it rings in the small hours, in a voice you miss more than anything in the world, let it ring. Let it ring. Story 3. The room that wasn't on the blueprint. We found the extra room by accident, the way I think everyone who has ever lived in that house found it, because the house did not give it up willingly and never has. We had been in the place 4 months, my husband and I, our first house, an old solid thing on a quiet street. more house than we'd expected to afford, and we were finally getting around to the renovation we'd promised ourselves, knocking out a wall between the kitchen and what the listing had called a formal dining room to make the big, bright, open space that people wanted now. And the contractor, a patient, careful man named Dell, who had been building and unbuilding houses in that town for 40 years, came to me on the second day with his measuring tape in his hand and a look on his face I have thought about many times since. He said, "Mrs. Okonkwo, I want to show you something, and it's probably nothing, and I probably shouldn't even mention it, but it'll bother me if I don't." And he took me through the downstairs with his tape, measuring the kitchen, the dining room, the hall, the little half bath under the stairs, writing the numbers on a scrap of paper. And then he took me outside and measured the footprint of the house, the outer walls, and he showed me the two numbers, the inside and the outside, and he said, "You see, there's a gap." And there was. Between the wall of the dining room and the wall of the hall, where by every measurement there should have been perhaps a foot of framing and insulation, there was instead, according to the difference between his numbers, a space. A room's worth of space, 8 feet deep, the width of the house, a whole room, sealed inside the walls of the ground floor, with no door, no window, no opening of any kind, a room that the house contained and did not admit to. Dell said houses were funny sometimes, that old ones got added onto and closed off, that maybe there'd been a room once that someone had walled up, a pantry, a cold store, and that it was probably full of nothing but dead air and mouse bones, but that he'd want to open it up before he did anything else. I want to tell this the right way, which means I have to tell you about the notebook, and to tell you about the notebook I have to tell you that we did not open the room that day, because Dell had another job to finish first, and so the wall stood for another week. And in that week I found, in the attic, going through the boxes the previous owners had left behind, the thing that changed it from a curiosity into the center of my life. The previous owners had left in a hurry. That was clear from the boxes. A whole life's worth of things left behind in an attic. The kind of thing people only do when they are leaving somewhere faster than they meant to. And in one of those boxes, under old curtains and a broken lamp, there was a notebook, a cheap spiral thing, and it was full, front to back, of a woman's handwriting. And the first page said, in careful letters, "For whoever finds this, please read all of it before you open the room." And below that, smaller, "Please. I am going to give you the notebook the way I read it, in pieces, because that is how it worked on me, and because I think the woman who wrote it, whose name I never learned, understood something about how a warning has to be delivered to be believed, which is slowly, so that by the time you understand it, you already know it's true." The first entries were ordinary. She and her husband had bought the house, she wrote, the same as us, more house than they'd expected, on the same quiet street. They'd been happy. And then, in a renovation, the same as us, a man with a measuring tape had found the gap, the sealed room, and they had opened it. Everyone opens it. That's what it's for. The room, she wrote, when they broke through the wall, was not full of dead air and mouse bones. It was clean. It was empty and clean. A plain plastered room 8 feet deep. No dust, no cobwebs, no smell of a place sealed for decades. A room that looked, she wrote, like it had been swept that morning, in a space that no one could have entered in years. And there was one thing in it. In the center of the far wall, at the height of a person, there was a door. A plain interior door, closed, in the far wall of a room that was itself sealed inside the outer wall of the house. A door that could not lead anywhere, because on the other side of that far wall was simply the outside, the yard, the open air. And yet there was a door, and it was closed. And when her husband had gone to it and put his hand on the knob, she wrote, 11 years. I read that and I thought of the boxes, the whole life left behind in a hurry, and I read on. The notebook was a record of 11 years of living with a sealed room that had a door in it that led nowhere. And it was, mostly, a record of rules. The woman had learned the house the way you learn to live, alongside anything you cannot get rid of. By observation, by trial, by paying the price for getting it wrong. Do not open the room was the first rule, underlined. But there were others, smaller, stranger, learned over years. Do not count the doors in the house at night. She had written that one out and then written underneath it, I know how that sounds. Count them in the day if you must. Never at night. There is always one more at night, and it is the one in the room. And if you have counted it, you have acknowledged it, and once you have acknowledged it, it will begin to be able to open. Do not, she wrote, let the children play near that wall after dark. Do not fall asleep in the dining room. If you hear knocking from inside the wall, it is not the pipes, and you must not knock back, not even once, not even to prove to yourself that it's nothing, because knocking back is a kind of answer. And the thing behind the door is very patient and has all the time in the world and is only ever waiting to be answered. There were more rules, and they got stranger the deeper into the 11 years she went, and I read all of them. Do not hang a mirror on any wall that faces the dining room, she wrote, because a mirror gives the room a second way to be seen into, and being seen is how it begins. Do not let anyone sleep over who doesn't know the rules, because the room is drawn to a sleeper who doesn't know to be afraid, and a guest is an open door of a different kind. The room is quietest, she wrote, in the week right before it is loudest. So a long silence is not a mercy, it is a gathering. And this one, which I read 3 times, if you ever find a door in your house that you don't remember, a door you've walked past 100 times and suddenly notice as if for the first time, do not open it and do not mention it to anyone else in the house. Because if no one else can see it, it is the room's door, come out to find you. And if you say it aloud, you make it real for the others too. And there was an entry near the middle that I've not been able to stop thinking about since, because it was the first time in the notebook that the careful, measured handwriting cracked. It was about her husband, years before he died, before any of the worst of it, when they still half thought the whole thing might be nothing. He had heard the knocking one night, and to prove to her that it was only the pipes, he had knocked back. 3 times, cheerful, rat-a-tat, on the wall of the dining room, just to show her, just to make her laugh. After the night he knocked back, the knocking came in 3s. Rat-a-tat. His rhythm, always his exact rhythm, the cheerful little pattern he had tapped out to prove there was nothing there, given back to them out of the wall, night after night, for years. In the dark, 3 knocks in his rhythm, because he had answered once as a joke, and the thing behind the door does not know the difference between a joke and a promise, and it never, ever forgets an answer. He never made a joke about the pipes again. And when he died, she wrote, the first night his voice came through the wall, it knocked first. 3 times. His rhythm. And then it spoke. There was one more thing in the notebook, tucked near the end, that I read last and have thought about most, because it is the only place the woman tried to describe what she believed the room actually was. Underneath all the rules, she wrote, I have decided it is not evil the way we mean evil. I do not think it hates us. I think it is a mouth. I think the house is a mouth, and the room is the throat of it, and the door in the room is where the throat goes down. And it does not hate the food. It only eats, patiently, one every few families, the way any mouth eats, and all its cleverness, the voices, the wearing of the ones we love, the knowing exactly what will make us open the door. And I do not know if she was right, but I have not been able to unthink it, that I am living inside a patient mouth, that the walls of my home are the inside of a throat, that the thing behind the wall is not a ghost or a demon, but only the appetite of the house itself, and that it is not angry, and it is not in a hurry, and it will simply, gently, when I am tired enough, when I have loved the wrong voice long enough. I sat in the attic with the notebook, and I did not want to believe it, and I could not stop reading it. Because the thing about the notebook, the thing that made the cold come up in me, was how sane it was. It was not the ranting of a frightened woman. It was careful and measured and organized, the record of an intelligent person who had encountered something impossible and had decided, since she could not escape it or explain it, to at least study it, to at least leave a true account for whoever came next. And the account grew. Over the 11 years, more and more certain of one thing, which she stated plainly about halfway through. The room is not a room. It is a threshold. The door in the far wall does not lead outside. It leads to wherever it is. The house sends the people it keeps, and the house always keeps someone. That is the arrangement. That is what the room is for. She had worked it out over the years from the history of the house, the way I would later confirm it myself. The house changed hands every 11 or 12 years, and every family that lived there, she was sure, opened the room, because the room made sure it would be found, made the numbers not add up, made the measuring tape reveal it, drew each new family to break through the wall and stand in the clean-swept space and look at the door that could not exist. And most families, she believed, sealed it back up and lived in fear the way she had, and left in a hurry when the 11 years were up, passing the house on, leaving the room for the next family to find. But some families opened the door, and the ones who opened the door did not leave in a hurry. The ones who opened the door did not leave at all. They went through, she wrote, and the house needed them to, because the arrangement, whatever it was, whoever or whatever the house had made its arrangement with, required that every so often, every few families, someone go through the door, and the room would wait, patient, through the ones who resealed it and fled, for the ones who were tired enough, or curious enough, or grieving enough to turn the knob. Her last entries were different, shorter. The careful handwriting had gone shaky. In the 11th year, she wrote, her husband had died suddenly at home, and she had been alone in the house with the room, and the knocking, which had been rare, an event of a few times a year, had become nightly. And worse than the knocking, she wrote, was the voice, because after her husband died, she had begun, some nights, to hear him, from behind the wall, from inside the sealed room, calling to her, gently, telling her he was there, that it wasn't so bad, that she should come and open the door and be with him, that he was just on the other side and it was only a door, only a door, only a door. She knew it wasn't him. That was her last clear entry, and I have never forgotten it. It's not him. I know it's not him. It's the room, wearing him, the way it will wear whoever you love most, because that is how it gets the door opened. It waits until you are alone and grieving, and then it gives you back the voice you would open any door in the world to hear. I am leaving tomorrow. I am leaving everything. I am not strong enough to live in this house another night with his voice behind that wall, because I am afraid that some night I will be tired enough to believe it. To whoever finds this, do not open the room, and if you have already opened it, seal it, and never listen to what comes through the wall, no matter whose voice it wears. Leave when your time comes. Pass it on, and forgive me for not warning you sooner, but there was no way to warn you that you would have believed before it was too late to matter. That was the last page. She had left the next morning, apparently, left the whole life in the attic, left the notebook for me, and I sat with it as the light died, and I understood that in 3 days, Dell was coming back to open the room. I did the thing you do now, the thing she could not have done as easily in her 11 years. I looked the house up. I sat up that night with my laptop, and I traced it back through the property records, the sales, the owners, and the pattern was exactly as she described it, the house turning over every 11 or 12 years. Regular as breathing, family after family, back further than the records went clearly, a house that no one ever seemed to keep. And then I did the other thing, the thing that took the notebook from a dead woman's strange story and made it a weight that has sat on my chest ever since. I looked up the names, the families who had lived here, and most of them I could find out in the world, having moved on to other towns, other houses, ordinary lives, the ones who had sealed the room and fled when their time was up, exactly as the notebook said. But not all of them. Every few families going back, there was a name I could not find having moved anywhere. And when I dug, when I searched those names against the name of this town, against this street, I found them, and I wish I hadn't. Missing persons. Not many. one every few decades, spread out so thin across the years that no one had ever connected them, that no one investigating one would ever have thought to look at another from 30 years before. But they were there, in the old newspaper archives, the county records, the cold case listings. A woman in 1974 who had lived in this house reported missing by her sister, last seen at home, no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle, simply gone. Her car in the driveway, her coffee still on the table, vanished from inside a locked house and never found. A man in 1961 the same. A young couple further back, both gone in a single night. The house left open and empty and undisturbed. Every few families, someone from this house had simply stopped, vanished from inside these walls, never found. The cases going cold and staying cold because there was nowhere to look, because they had not gone anywhere a search party could follow, because they had gone through the door and the house had kept them. And then it had sold and the pattern had resumed, the ceiling and the fleeing families passing the house down over the ones who opened the door until enough time had gone by and the room was hungry again, and the next tired soul turned the knob. I closed the laptop. I did the arithmetic in my head, the way you do, the way you shouldn't. The last name I could find that had simply vanished from this house was decades back, which meant it had been a long time since the room had kept anyone, which meant, by the terrible logic of the pattern, that it was, again, hungry. And I was the one who lived here now. I did not tell my husband about the notebook. I know how that sounds after everything the woman wrote about telling people, but you have to understand, my husband is a rational man, a wonderful rational man, and I knew exactly what would happen if I showed him a dead stranger's notebook full of rules about not counting doors at night. He would be kind about it. He would be gentle, and he would open that room with his own two hands specifically to prove to me, out of love, that there was nothing to be afraid of. Because that is what rational, loving men do with their frightened wives, and the notebook had told me, everyone opens it. That's what it's for. So I did the thing I thought would save us. I told him I'd changed my mind about the renovation. I said I liked the dining room after all, that I didn't want the wall knocked out, that I'd been hasty, and he was surprised and a little disappointed, but he loved me. And he called Dell and canceled, and I thought for one foolish night that I had done it, that I'd kept the room sealed and saved us both. But the room makes sure it will be found. I had forgotten that, or hadn't let myself believe it. And a house is not renovated only from the inside. 3 weeks later, a different man came from the county about the property line, some routine thing to do with a survey, and he was in the yard with his own equipment, his own measurements, and he knocked on my door with a puzzled look and a scrap of paper. And he said, "Ma'am, this is strange, but your house doesn't match its own footprint. There's a discrepancy here on the north side, a sealed space by the look of it. Did you?" And I stood in my doorway, and I felt the whole thing close around me like a hand, because it did not matter what I did, the room would keep making itself known, through Dell, through the county man, through the next thing and the next, drawing attention to itself, insisting on being found. And I understood that the woman who wrote the notebook had not been able to keep it sealed forever either, that no one ever had, that the ceiling was. I have not opened it. I want to say that clearly, the way the woman in the notebook said it, because I am writing this the way she wrote hers, in a notebook, in this attic, for whoever comes next, because I understand now that this is simply the thing the women of this house do. We leave the record. We pass the warning we could not act on. We do the one small brave thing that is left to us, which is to make the next ones. I have not opened the room, but I have begun to hear the knocking. It started a month ago, soft, from the wall of the dining room, at night. And I have not knocked back. I swear to you I have not knocked back. Though some nights, the wanting to is almost more than I can bear. The wanting to just tap once, just to prove it's the pipes, just to answer. And I nearly did the other thing, too, the counting thing. The rule I thought was the silliest of all of them, right up until the night I almost broke it. I had been living so carefully, following the dead woman's rules like scripture, and one night I woke thirsty and went down through the dark house for water, and I was tired, half asleep, my mind loose and drifting, and I found myself walking through my own house in the dark, counting the doors, not on purpose, the way you count stairs without meaning to, the way your mind reaches for a pattern when it's tired and unmoored. Front door, 1. Coat closet, 2. Half bath, 3. And up the stairs and along the hall, 4, 5, 6. My sleeping mind ticking them off, and I was nearly back to my bedroom, nearly safe, when the count reached the number I knew the house should end on. And I felt, before I could stop myself, my mind begin to reach for one more. Because there was one more, I could feel it down in the dark of the ground floor. I have been careful, since, never to count anything in the dark. But I dream about it now. I dream I am walking through the house counting, and I cannot stop. And I reach the last true door, and my own voice in the dream says the next number, calm and clear, and I wake with it in my mouth. And last week, my husband was in the hospital for 3 days. His appendix, nothing serious, he's fine, he's home now. But for 3 days, I was alone in the house at night. And on the second night, from behind the wall of the dining room, from inside the sealed room I have never opened, I heard him, my husband. Alive in a hospital across town, and also, somehow, behind the wall, his voice, warm and tired, saying my name, saying, "Honey, it's so strange, I don't know how. But I'm here. I'm right here. Come and open the door. It's only a door, honey. I'm right here. Come and let me in." The first knock came before the voice, and I knew, the instant I heard it, that the notebook had told me true about everything. 3 knocks. A cheerful little rhythm. Rat-a-tat. My husband's rhythm, the one from the dead woman's entry. Except my husband had never knocked on that wall. My husband didn't know there was anything to knock about. My husband was in a hospital bed across town full of painkillers and mild jokes about his own appendix. But there it was, his rhythm, that I somehow knew was his, even though I'd never heard him tap it. 3 knocks in a pattern that was his and had always been his, waiting somewhere in him for the room to find and use. And then, after the knock, the voice. I did not go to it the first night. I lay in our bed upstairs with the pillow over my head, and I did not go. And in the morning the sun came up, and the house was ordinary. And I told myself I could last 2 more nights. That he'd be home? That once he was actually home in the flesh, the thing behind the wall would lose its hold. But the second night was worse, because the second night I was more tired, and loneliness wears you the way water wears stone, and the voice was so patient, so warm, so exactly him, and it did not beg. That was the terrible cleverness of it. It did not plead or frighten. It just talked, gently, the way he talked to me in bed in the dark, about small. I found myself downstairs. I found myself standing in the dining room in the dark, and I do not remember deciding to go there. I only remember being there, my bare feet on the cold floor, facing the flat, innocent wall, and the voice on the other side of it saying, "Oh, there you are, honey. There you are. I knew you'd come. It's only a door." And I found that my hand had come up, that my hand was reaching toward the wall, toward where the notebook said the sealed room's own. And I thought of the dead woman in the notebook, standing exactly here, with exactly this voice in her ear, and how she had not been strong enough to stay another night, and how she had run. And I thought of the missing ones, the woman in 1974 with her coffee still warm on the table, gone from inside a locked house, and I understood that this was the moment, this exact moment in the dark, with my hand rising, that each of them had come to, and that some had turned and fled up the stairs and lived, and some had put their hand on the wall, and that there was no difference between those 2 kinds of people. I took my hand down. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it looked like nothing. A woman in a dark room lowering her own hand, and the voice said, gently, disappointed, so patient, "That's all right, honey. Another night. I'm not going anywhere." And I turned and I walked up the stairs, and I did not run, because running felt like admitting how close it had been. And I sat on the landing. He came home the next day. My husband, the real one, warm and alive and complaining cheerfully about the hospital food, and I held onto him so hard he laughed and asked what that was for, and I said I'd just missed him, which was true. which was the truest thing I have ever said. And the voice behind the wall went quiet once he was home, the way I'd hoped it would. And for a few days, I let myself believe the danger had passed with his homecoming. But it hasn't passed. It has only gone back to waiting, because it does not need him to be away. It never did. The away was only convenient. It has all the time in the world. And now it knows something it did not know before. Now it knows how close it can get me. It got me all the way to the wall, all the way to a raised hand, on nothing more than a husband gone 3 nights for a routine surgery. And it will remember that, the way it remembered his knock, because it never forgets anything. And it will wait for the next time I am tired enough, and the next, and the next, and it only has to be right once. I sat on the floor of my dining room in the dark with my back against the far wall, the wall of the room, close enough to feel it if he'd been real, close enough that the voice was right against my ear through the plaster, and I did not open it, and I did not answer, and I understood 2 things that the woman in the notebook had understood at the end, and that I will leave here for you the way she left them for me. The first is that it does not need you to be grieving. She thought it wore the voices of the dead, but my husband is alive, and it wore him anyway, wore him perfectly, because it does not reach into the grave for the voice. It reaches into you, into your love, into the person you would open any door in the world for, alive or dead, and it becomes that, because the door is not opened by grief. The door is opened by love, and love does not require anyone to be dead. And the second is that I am not going to be able to keep this up. That is the true and terrible thing. The thing I need you to know if you're the next one in this house, reading this in this attic with a canceled renovation and a sealed room and a warning you don't want to believe. I have not opened it, but I have started to understand that the room does not need me to open it today or this year. It has all the time in the world. It only needs me to be some ordinary night, tired enough or lonely enough or to love someone enough that when the voice comes through the wall and a voice I would follow anywhere, I finally, after all my careful rules and my canceled renovations and my brave little notebook, get up off the floor and cross the room and put my hand on the wall and answer. I don't know when that night will be, but I know it's coming because it came for her and for the ones before her. And the house has been keeping someone every few families for longer than anyone has counted. And I live here now, and I am not stronger than the ones who lived here before. So I'm doing the only thing left. I'm writing it down. I'm putting this notebook in a box in the attic under the old curtains for whoever finds it, and I'm giving you the rules, all of them, the ones I learned from her and the ones I've learned myself. Don't open the room. Don't count the doors at night. Don't knock back. Don't fall asleep in the dining room. And when the voice comes through the wall, in the voice of the person you love most in the world, alive or dead, telling you it's only a door, telling you to come and let them in, do not answer, do not answer, do not answer, no matter how tired you are, no matter how alone. And when your 11 years are up, leave. Leave everything. Pass it on. I'm so sorry there's no way to warn you that you'll believe. Sleep somewhere else in the house tonight, not the dining room. And if you hear knocking, it's the pipes. Tell yourself it's the pipes. And if your house has ever felt, even once, like it was a little bigger on the outside than the inside, if a room ever seemed too small for the wall it shared, if a man with a measuring tape ever frowned and said, "That's strange, there's a gap here," then do not, whatever you do, go looking for the sealed space. Do not break through the wall to see what the house is keeping. Because the house wants you to find it, leave the gap alone. Let the numbers not add up. Some houses keep a room, and the room keeps a door, and the door is patient, and the only mercy is to live your whole life and never once open it. Don't knock back. Story 4. My grandmother's clock. My grandmother kept a lace cloth over the face of her clock for as long as I was alive to see it, and probably for a long time before, and no one in the family ever thought it was strange, because families are like that. They absorb the strange habits of the old and file them under character and never look at them again. The clock was a mantel clock, dark wood, 100 years old at least, with a round glass front over the face and the pendulum, the kind you wind with a key. It sat on the mantel in her front room my whole childhood, and over its glass front, always, was draped a square of yellowing lace, an old handkerchief really, so that you could hear it ticking, but you could not see its face, could not see the time, could not see anything of it at all, but the shape of a covered thing on the shelf. If a child asked, and I did once, why the cloth, she said, to keep the dust out of the works, dear, and that was that. And it made a kind of sense, the way the explanations of grandmothers always make a kind of sense, and I never asked again. I grew up with a clock I heard every day of my childhood, and never once saw the face of. Tick and tick and tick from under its little lace shroud, marking out the hours of every visit, every holiday, every long, slow Sunday afternoon in my grandmother's front room, a sound so woven into the fabric of that house that I think I would have known I was there with my eyes closed, just from the particular ticking of the covered clock. I spent a great deal of my childhood in that front room, because my grandmother was the one who kept me while my parents worked, and so the covered clock and I grew up together in a way. I remember the winding, the great ceremony she made of it every 8th day, how she would take down the little brass key from the hook where it hung, and open the small door in the side of the case, and wind, and how her face while she wound was always still and serious in a way it was not at any other time. The face of a person performing not a chore but a duty, and how she would test the pendulum. I thought it was just her way. Old people have their ceremonies, and I remember too, though I did not think anything of it then, that she never left me alone in that room, not once. If she had to go to the kitchen, to the bathroom, she took me with her, or she called me to come, always, every time. And if I ever lingered, if I ever said I wanted to stay and play with my toys on the rug, she would say, "Come sit with Grandma, dear," in a voice that left no room. And I would come. And only years later did I understand that she was not keeping me quiet. She was not leaving a child alone in the room with the clock. And I remember one thing more, one thing that has come back to me since, sharp and cold, out of the soft blur of childhood. I asked her once, I must have been 6 or 7, why she kept the radio on all the time. Even when no one was listening, even at night, I could hear it from the spare room where I slept when I stayed over. A low murmur of voices and music all night long. And she said, I like the company, dear. And I said, but you're asleep. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I did not understand then and understand far too well now. She said, the quiet lets things in. And I thought she meant loneliness. I thought it was an old woman being sad about being a widow. I know now she meant it exactly, precisely, literally. The quiet lets things in. She had spent her whole life keeping the quiet out. She died when I was 36. It was slow at the end. A long fading in a hospital bed the family took turns sitting beside, and it was on one of my turns, late, when it was just the two of us in the dim room, that she took my hand with her light, dry, papery hand and made me promise the thing I would spend the rest of my life keeping. She said, the clock. You'll take the clock when I'm gone. I want you to have it. And I said, of course, Grandma. I'd love the clock, thinking it a sweet thing, an heirloom, the sound of my childhood to carry forward. And her grip tightened, more strength in it than I thought she had left. And she looked at me with a clarity that the fading had mostly taken from her, a sudden, sharp, lucid focus. And she said, listen to me. You keep it wound. You never let it stop. And you keep the cloth over the face. You never take the cloth off. Promise me. And I said, the cloth. Why? And something moved behind her eyes, some old, exhausted fear. And she said, just promise me. You never take the cloth off. You never look at the face. You keep it covered and you keep it wound. And you pass it on the same way when your time comes, cloth and all. Promise. And I promised the way you promise a dying woman anything, to give her peace. And she settled back, and the sharp focus went out of her, and she died 3 days later, and I took the clock home. I kept my promise for almost 2 years. I want that on the record because of what comes after. I put the clock on my own mantle in my own front room, and I wound it every 8th day with the little brass key the way she'd shown me. And I kept the lace cloth draped over its glass face, and it ticked in my house the way it had ticked in hers. And it was a comfort, that sound, my grandmother's clock ticking away the hours of my own life now. And if I sometimes felt a small strangeness at living with the clock, it was the cleaning that did it. It's always something so small, so innocent. I was cleaning the mantle, dusting, and the lace cloth was itself gray with age and dust, and I thought, I'll just wash it. I'll take it off for an hour and wash it and put it right back. Grandma would understand. She wouldn't want her own clock kept under a filthy rag. And I lifted the cloth off the glass face of my grandmother's clock. For the first time in my life, in the bright ordinary light of a weekday afternoon, to wash it. And I looked, for the first time, at the face. It was an ordinary clock face. That was almost the worst of it in the moment. Roman numerals, black hands, a small brass pendulum swinging behind the lower glass. It told the time, the correct time, the ordinary time, and I stood there holding the dusty cloth, and I felt a little foolish, a little sad, that my grandmother had spent her whole life, had spent her dying breath, protecting me from the sight of a perfectly ordinary clock face. And then I saw, in the round glass over the face, the reflection. You know how a glass front reflects the room? Faintly, darkly, a curved little mirror of whatever's in front of it. And in the curved glass of my grandmother's clock, I could see, reflected, my own front room behind me, the window, the light, my couch. And in the reflection of my couch, sitting on it, watching the clock, was my grandmother. I did not turn around. I want you to understand that some animal part of me, older and wiser than the rest, knew instantly not to turn around, knew that the room behind me was empty, that my couch was empty, that only in the glass was she there. She was sitting exactly the way she always sat, upright, hands folded in her lap, her head turned toward the clock, watching it, the way I realize now she must have watched it her whole life, and she was not looking at me. She was looking at the clock, at the face I had just uncovered, and her own face, in the little dark reflection, was not peaceful. It was afraid. My dead grandmother sat on my empty couch in the reflection of her own clock's glass and watched the uncovered face with an expression of pure, patient, exhausted fear. The same fear I had seen for one sharp moment in the hospital. And I understood, standing there with the cloth in my hand, that this was what the cloth was for, not to keep the dust out of the works, to keep the glass covered. Because the glass was not reflecting my room. The glass was a window, and my grandmother was on the other side of it, and she had spent her whole life keeping it covered so that she would never have to see through, and so that nothing on the other side would ever be seen looking back. I put the cloth back over the glass with hands that had gone numb and cold. I put it back, and I smoothed it down, and I stepped away, and I stood in the middle of my front room breathing hard, and behind me my empty couch was empty, and the clock ticked under its cloth, and I told myself the thing you tell yourself, a trick of the light, a curved reflection, grief and dust, and a curved piece of old glass, my mind filling the reflection with the grandmother I missed, and I almost believed it. I almost managed to file it away. But I had seen her face, and her face had been afraid. And you do not fill a longed-for reflection with fear. That is not what grief conjures. Grief conjures comfort, conjures the beloved dead at peace, smiling, restored. Grief does not put your grandmother on your couch with the exhausted terror of a woman who has been watching something for 60 years. My mind had not made that. My mind would never have made that. That had been on the other side of the glass, looking through, and it had been afraid. I did not take the cloth off again for a long time after that. I kept my promise harder than ever, wound the clock on the 8th day, kept the face covered, and I truly tried, to go back to not looking, to the long family habit of the covered clock. But something had changed, because I knew now, and you cannot unknow. And knowing changes what you hear, because now, at night, when the house was quiet and the clock ticked in the dark front room, I began to hear, underneath the ticking, or between the ticks, in the small spaces the ticking left, another sound. Faint. Soft. The sound of someone in the front room, moving, settling, the creak of my couch taking a weight, and I would lie in my bed upstairs and listen to the tick and tick and tick, and in the spaces between, my empty couch downstairs creaking as though someone were sitting down on it. Someone who had come through or been let through, or who had always been on the other side, and was now, since I had lifted the cloth. I told myself it was the house settling. I told myself it was the couch springs in the cold. I wound the clock. I kept the cloth on, and I began, God help me, to understand my grandmother's whole life differently. In a slow, terrible dawning, the way you re-understand a person after they're gone and it's too late to ask. My grandmother had been a nervous woman, a careful woman, a woman who never left her house empty, who kept every light on, who could not bear silence and always had the radio going, who wound her clock without fail every 8th day for as long as anyone could remember, and kept it draped and never ever looked at its face. We had thought her fussy. We had thought her a creature of habit, of superstition, a sweet, anxious old woman. And she had been a guard. She had been standing watch her whole life, over a covered window with something on the other side of it, keeping it wound because a stopped clock is a silent clock, and the silence was where the other sound lived. Keeping it covered because an uncovered glass is a glass that can be seen through in both directions. Keeping the radio on and the lights burning and the house full of noise and light because the thing in the clock. I looked into the history of the clock, the way you can look into anything now. It had come to my grandmother from her own grandmother, and I had always known that. It was family lore, the clock that came down through the women of the family, but I had never asked, because you never ask what came down with it. I found what I could. My great-great-grandmother had owned it in the old country before any of us came across the water. And she too, the fragments of family memory said, had been a nervous woman, a woman who kept a cloth over her clock and could not bear the dark. And her mother before her, back as far as the thread of memory ran, a line of women, all of them anxious, all of them careful, all of them keeping the lights on and the noise. And I understood that I was the newest guard, and that I would be the guard until I died, and that then I would have to find a daughter or a granddaughter of my own, and take her hand with my light, dry, papery hand, and make her promise, keep it wound, keep it covered, never look at the face, and hand her the sentence the way it had been handed to me, and that this was simply what the women of my family did, but I had already looked. That was the difference between me and all of them. Or so I feared. All those women, as far as I could tell, had kept the promise, had never lifted the cloth, had guarded the window without ever once seeing through it, and so the thing on the other side had never been fully seen and had never fully seen them, and the watch had held. I had lifted the cloth. I had looked. I had seen my grandmother, or the thing wearing my grandmother, sitting on my couch watching the face, and it had, in that moment, seen me looking. I had done the one thing generations of frightened women had known never to do, and I did not know what it had cost, only that the couch had begun to creak in the night, that the sound between the ticks was getting clearer, that the watch I had inherited was already, because of me, because of a dusty cloth and an idle afternoon, beginning to fail. I have taken to keeping the lights on all night now. I have taken to keeping the radio going, low, in the front room, so that the ticking is never alone in the silence, so that there is always sound, always noise, the way my grandmother kept it, and I understand her now. I understand every anxious habit of her long-guarded life, and I am becoming her, one careful, fearful habit at a time. I wind the clock on the 8th day. I have never lifted the cloth again, but some nights the creak of the couch is so clear, so close, so exactly the sound of a person settling down to watch and wait, that I lie in my bed and I know, the way you know a truth in the middle of the night, that if I went downstairs and lifted the cloth now in the dark, I would not see my grandmother in the glass anymore. I would see whatever had been behind her. I would see it much closer to the glass than it was that afternoon, and I would see it looking out. And this time it would not be afraid, because it would know, the way I know, that the watch is failing, that a guard who has looked is a guard who is already halfway lost, and that it has, after all these patient generations, all these careful women, finally found the one who lifted the cloth. I tried to get rid of it. Of course I did. That is the first thing anyone would think of, and I thought of it in the worst of the nights. That if the clock was the door, then I could simply be rid of the door, sell it, give it away, put it out with the trash, break it with a hammer, and be free. I tried, first, to sell it. I called an antiques dealer, an old solid man who knew clocks, and he came and looked at it, and I took the cloth off in front of him, hating myself, my hand shaking, and in the bright afternoon with another living person in the room, the glass showed nothing but the ordinary reflection of my ordinary room. No grandmother, no watcher, only the dealer and me. And I almost wept with relief and thought, the dealer admired it, said it was a fine old piece, said he'd take it and give me a good price. And then, as he was writing out the number, he paused and he frowned at the clock, and he said in a puzzled way, "That's strange." And I said, "What?" And he said, "It stopped." And it had, in the few minutes we'd been talking. The clock, which I had wound only 2 days before, which had 8 days of movement in it, had stopped. The pendulum hung still, and the dealer, who knew clocks, could not start it again, wind it how he might. And after 20 minutes of trying, he handed me back the key and said, apologetically, that he couldn't in good conscience buy a clock, he couldn't get running, that there must be something wrong in the works, and he left. And the moment the door closed behind him, the clock, on its own, with no hand near it, began, again. It did not want to be sold. It would not run for anyone who might take it away. It ran only for me. I tried this to put it away, to carry it up to the attic, out of the front room, out of the quiet dark heart of the house, and I got as far as lifting it off the mantel. Off its shelf, the sound came, not from the room but from the clock itself, from inside the case against my chest. The sound of the case against my chest, the sound of the couch creaking, close, right against me, and under it for the first. So this is my warning, and it is a strange one. And I am sorry it is not more useful to most of you, because most of you do not have my grandmother's clock. But some of you have something like it. Some of you have the covered thing in the family, the object no one explains, the mirror that is always turned to the wall, the door that is always kept locked, the room no one uses, the habit of the dead that everyone files under character and never looks at again. And I am telling you, do not uncover it. Do not turn the mirror around to see what it faces. Do not unlock the door to see why it was locked. Do not lift the cloth. The careful, frightened people who came before you, the anxious grandmothers with their strange rules. They were not fussy, and they were not superstitious. They were guards. They were standing watch. And every strange rule they kept was a wall between you and something they love you too much to name. And when they hand you the watch, cloth and all, take it and keep it, and never, ever look to see what you are guarding against. There was one night, the worst so far, that I have to tell you about, because it is the night I understood how this ends, not in some final confrontation, some dramatic uncovering, but in simple exhaustion, in the slow wearing down of a tired woman by a patient thing that has all the time in the world. It was very late, and the radio in the front room had for some reason gone silent, some fault in the old thing, and I woke in the dark upstairs to the tick and tick and tick, alone now, unaccompanied, and in the spaces between the ticks, the creak of the couch, and then, that night, for the first time, a voice. My grandmother's voice, soft, from the front room, from downstairs, saying my name. Just my name, gently, the way she used to call me in from the rug to come sit with her. And then, "Come down, dear. Come sit with Grandma. Come and take the cloth off. I want to see you. It's been so long. Come down and lift the cloth and let me see your face." And I got up. God help me, I got up. the way you do when a voice you have loved your whole life calls you in the dark. And I went to the top of the stairs, and I stood there in my nightgown looking down into the dark front room where the clock ticked, and my grandmother's voice called me. So warm, so patient. Come down, dear. Just lift the cloth. And I got 3 steps down the stairs before I stopped. Before sun, and I understood that this was exactly the night every woman before me had faced. The night the voice comes. The night you are tired enough and grieving enough, and it is dark enough and quiet enough. And I understood that the ones who had kept the watch were simply the ones who had stopped on the stairs, and the ones who had vanished from the family, the ones no one spoke of, or the ones who had kept walking down. I turned around. I went back up. I fixed the radio the next morning with my hands still shaking, and I bought a second one, a spare, and a third, because I understood now that the silence is the enemy, that the quiet lets things in, exactly as she told me, and that my whole life now, like her whole life, would be a war against silence, waged with radios and lights and the winding of a clock, for as long as I could hold out. I wind the clock on the 8th day. I keep the cloth on the glass. I keep the lights on and the radio low, and now a second radio and a third, in case one fails in the night, because I have learned that the silence is where it lives, and I will not let the silence fall. I forgot to wind it once. Only once. It was in the worst of the exhaustion, when the sleepless watching had worn a hole in my days, and the 8th day came and went and I did not notice, and it was late on the 9th night, lying in my bed, that I realized, with a jolt of pure ice, that I could not remember the last time I had wound the clock, and that a mantel clock wound for 8 days does not run for 9. I ran down the stairs, but tick and the pendulum swinging ran out, and swinging shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and tick and the longer pause and the last minutes before it stops forever, and in the lengthening pauses between the failing ticks, in the little growing silences, I heard it, for the first time undeniable, the other sound, the sound, the sound. The sound the ticking had been covering my whole life, a sound rising up into the spaces and I have started, when I pass the mantel in the evening, to keep my own eyes on the floor, because twice now, in the very corner of my vision, in the curved glass under the lace, I have thought I saw, faintly reflected, a woman sitting on my empty couch, watching the clock, upright, hands folded. And I am afraid that if I looked directly, I would see that I am afraid it is starting to be me. Because I did look again. Once. I have to confess it, because it is the reason I know how little time the watch has left. It was a bad night, one of the worst, and I had been drinking a little to quiet my nerves, which the diary of my own fear had told me never to do, because the quiet lets things in, and drink is its own kind of quiet. And in the small hours, half brave with wine, and wholly sick of being afraid, I went to the mantel, and I lifted the cloth, just for a second, just to see, and it was not my grandmother in the glass anymore. It was closer, whatever it was, closer to the surface of the glass than she had ever been, filling more of the small, curved reflection, and it was still shaped like a woman sitting in a chair. But the face, oh, the face was wrong now, was not a face so much as the idea of a face pressed up against the other side of the glass from within, blurred and pale and eager, no longer afraid the way my grandmother had been afraid. But I dropped the cloth. I have not lifted it since, and I never will again. And I keep 3 radios now, and every light, and I wind the clock with my eyes on the key and never on the face, because I have seen how close it is, how thin the glass has become, how the hand is already pressed against it from the other side, waiting for the watch to fail, waiting for the one careless night. I have a daughter. She is 24, and she is bright and unafraid, and lives her loud, full life in a city 3 hours away, and she does not know about any of this. And when she visits, she teases me, gently, lovingly, about my strange new habits, the radios in every room, the lights I leave burning, the old covered clock I'd fuss over. "Mom," she says, "you're turning into great-grandma." And she laughs, and I laugh, and inside I go cold, because she is right. She is exactly right. I am turning into her, one careful, fearful habit at a time. And I know, the way I know everything now, that the day is coming. Years off, I hope. Decades off, I pray. But coming, when I will be old and fading, You'll take the clock. You keep it wound. You keep the cloth on the face. You never look. And I will pass her the sentence the way it was passed to me, and to my grandmother, and back, and she will think it is sentiment, a sweet dying wish, an heirloom, and she will not understand until it is too late that I have handed her a lifetime of standing watch in the dark. And that is the cruelest part, the part I lie awake with. Worse than the voice on the stairs. Worse than the thing that is starting to wear my face in the glass. That I will have to do it. That love in my family comes down the same channel as the horror, that they cannot be separated, that to keep her safe I must first bind her, that the only way to protect my daughter from the thing in the clock is to make her its next guard, and that she will spend her whole bright, unafraid life as I am spending mine, as my grandmother spent hers, at war with silence, keeping the lights on, keeping. I will do to her what was done to me. I will have no choice. And she will do it to hers. And the clock will tick on, covered on some mantle, in some front room, guarded by some tired, frightened woman who was once a bright, unafraid girl, for as long as our family lasts. Because the alternative is to stop guarding it. And I have learned what happens when the guarding stops. Sleep now. Keep something on, a light, a low sound. And whatever the careful dead in your family kept covered, kept locked, kept turned to the wall, leave it that way. They knew what they were doing. They were keeping watch. And if there is no covered thing in your family, no clock, no locked door, no mirror turned to the wall, then be grateful and sleep easy. Because it means the watch in your line was kept, all the way down, unbroken, by women you will never know were guarding you. And it means no one ever lifted the cloth. And it means you are free, in a way I will never be again, free of a dupe. But if there is such a thing, if you have read this and thought of the object no one explains, the habit of the dead that everyone calls character, then go tomorrow in the daylight and look at it, not by uncovering it, never that, but look at how carefully it is kept covered, kept locked, kept turned away, and understand that the care is a message left for you by some. Keep it as they kept it. And when the time comes, keep it that way for the one who comes after you, and tell them nothing except, don't lift the cloth. Now it's your turn. Don't lift the cloth. Story 5. The friend my daughter made. My daughter Nora was 4 when she made a new friend, and for a while it was the sweetest thing in the world, and I want to hold on to that, the sweetness of the beginning, because it's the only part of this story that doesn't frighten me, and because it's the reason I didn't stop it in time. Little children make friends out of the air. Everyone knows this. It's a sign of a healthy imagination. The books all say so. The friend who lives in the closet, the friend who sits in the empty chair at dinner, the friend you have to buckle into the car. I had one myself, my mother told me, when I was small, though I don't remember it. So when Nora came to me one morning and told me, with the great seriousness small children bring to their most important news, that she had a new friend now, and the friend lived in our house, I smiled, and I asked her friend's name, and she told me, and I thought it was the most charming thing I'd ever heard. The friend's name was Tuesday. I asked her again, sure I'd misheard, and she said it again, patient with her slow mother, Tuesday. And I laughed and said, that's a funny name for a friend. And Nora looked at me very steadily and said, it's not her name. It's just what she lets me call her, because I can't say her real name. It's too old. And something in the way she said it, too old, the words too large for her 4-year-old mouth, made the laugh die a little in my throat, but only a little, because children say strange things. Children are little poets who don't know they're being strange. And I filed it away, and I made her breakfast, and I did not think about it again for days. Tuesday became a part of our lives the way an imaginary friend does. Nora set a place for her at the table. Nora talked to her in the empty corners of rooms. Nora would pause in the middle of playing and tilt her head as though listening, and then laugh, or nod, or say, okay, and go on. I played along the way you do. I'd ask, is Tuesday joining us for lunch? And Nora would consult the air and tell me yes or no. I'd say goodnight to Tuesday when I tucked Nora in. It was ordinary. It was even, I told myself, good, a sign of a bright, creative little girl, and I was proud of her, my imaginative daughter and her friend with the strange old name. The first thing that was wrong, the first thing I couldn't quite play along with, was when Nora started telling me things Tuesday told her. Because Tuesday, it turned out, knew things. Nora came to me one afternoon and said, "Matter of fact, Tuesday says you're going to have a baby." And I laughed, startled, and said, "Oh, does she?" And Nora nodded and went back to her toys, and I did not think much of it, except that I was, in fact, 2 weeks pregnant, and had told no one, and had only found out myself the day before, and had not said a word to anyone. I told myself it was a coincidence, a lucky guess, that children pick up on things, that maybe I'd been sick in the mornings and she'd noticed. But she hadn't said, "Are you sick?" or "Is something wrong?" She had said, "You're going to have a baby." And she had gotten it from Tuesday. And she had been right. There were other things Tuesday knew. Small things, at first, easy to explain, until there were too many of them to keep explaining. Nora told me one morning that Tuesday said Grandpa was sorry about the watch, and I went cold. Because my father had died 2 years before Nora was born, she had never met him, and there had been a watch, his father's watch, that had gone missing after his death, that the family had quietly suspected my uncle of taking, that had caused a rift, that no one had spoken of in front of a child because it was ugly and adult. "Where would you like it to be, sweetheart?" I asked her, keeping my voice light, and she said, "Tuesday says, look under the floor in the closet." And I did, weeks later, when I was brave enough, and there was a loose board, and under it, wrapped in a handkerchief, my grandfather's watch, where my father must have hidden it and forgotten, or hidden it and died before he could say, and no living person had known it was there. No living person. But Tuesday knew, and Nora drew her. That was the other thing, the thing I kept, that I still have, a folder of them. Nora drew Tuesday over and over, the way children draw the things that fill their world, and children's drawings are wonderful and terrible and always the same, the round head, the stick limbs, the enormous smile. But Nora's drawings of Tuesday were not a child's drawing of another child. They were always a tall, thin shape, taller than the mommy shape and the Nora shape she drew beside it. A long, dark, vertical thing with no face, just a smudge where a face would be, and it was always in the corner of the paper, always a little apart, always. And when I asked Nora why Tuesday didn't have a face, she looked at the drawing and then at me and said, "Because you're not allowed to see her face until you say yes." And I said, "Yes to what?" And Nora said, "Yes to staying," and went back to coloring, and I put that drawing at the bottom of the folder where I wouldn't have to see it, and I did not sleep well that night. There were rules, too, that Nora let slip, the way children let slip the rules of their secret games. Tuesday says, I'm not supposed to tell you what her face looks like. Tuesday says she can only come when I'm by myself. That's why she doesn't come when you're in the room. She's shy of grown-ups. Tuesday says, if I'm very good and very quiet, she'll show me the way to the always place. But it's a secret, and secrets are how you know someone's really your friend. And I would hear these rules in my daughter's cheerful voice and feel the architecture of the thing behind them, the careful, patient construction of a secret world I was being locked out of, my daughter being taught, gently, lovingly, to keep things from me, to be alone with her friend, to understand that the friendship and its secrets were the measure of love. And I recognized it. And Nora began to sleepwalk. She never had before, but now, some nights, I would find her out of her bed, standing in the dark hallway, facing the door to the basement, that same basement, the dark heart of the house, her small hand on the doorknob, her eyes open but not awake, and when I took her gently by the shoulders and turned her around, she would murmur, still asleep, "Coming. Tuesday, I'm coming," and let me lead her back to bed. And in the morning, after that, I started to listen differently to the things Nora reported from her friend. And the things got stranger, and they got, slowly, colder. Tuesday says she used to live here, Nora told me, a long, long time ago, before the house was even this house. Tuesday says she doesn't like it when it's dark, but she can't go where the light is. Tuesday says she's been waiting for a long time for a friend. Tuesday is sad, Mommy. She's so sad. She just wants someone to stay and play with her, and nobody ever stays. And I would ask, gently, the way you probe a child's fantasy, well, where does Tuesday want you to stay and play, sweetheart? And Nora would get a little vague, a little dreamy, and say, in her place, the nice place, the always place, and change the subject. And I would feel the cold move a little further up my spine and tell myself it was nothing, a little girl's story. But a 4-year-old mind does not produce the always place. A 4-year-old does not, unprompted, invent a sad old thing that lived in the house before the house existed and cannot go into the light and has been waiting a long time for a friend who will stay. That is not the shape of a child's imagination. A child's imaginary friend is a mirror. It likes what the child likes. It's scared of what the child's scared of. It's the child, essentially, given a name and a chair. Tuesday was not a mirror of Nora. Tuesday had her own history, her own sadness, her own wants, her own patience. And they were not a child's. They were old. And Nora was reporting them the way you report the words of a real other person. A person with an inner life entirely separate from your own. And children do not invent people with inner lives separate from their own, because they cannot. I tried, first, the ordinary things. I asked our pediatrician, casually, at Nora's checkup, about imaginary friends. And she gave me the ordinary reassurance. Perfectly normal. Sign of intelligence. Most kids grow out of it by 6 or 7. Nothing to worry about unless the child seems distressed. And Nora didn't seem distressed. That was the thing. Nora was happy. Nora loved Tuesday. Nora would spend hours playing contentedly with her friend, laughing, chattering, and to any observer it was the picture of a well-adjusted, imaginative little girl, and only I heard the things Tuesday said, filtered through Nora's cheerful little voice, and only I felt the cold. I looked into the house, because by then I could not. We had bought it 3 years before, an old house, and I had never asked its history, the way you never do. I found what I could. It was old. Older than its official records, built and rebuilt on the same ground for a very long time. And there had been, over the decades, over the century, children in it, of course, generations of children. And I could not find anything as clean as a tragedy. A child who died, a name I could point to and say, that's Tuesday. That's who she was. But I found a pattern. The same kind of pattern the woman in the notebook found. The kind of pattern you only see once you're looking for it. And it was this. The house had a strange history with its children. Every few decades, going back as far as I could trace, a child had gone missing from this house, or from the family in it. Not many. One, here and there, spread across the years. A little boy in the 20s wandered off, never found. A little girl in the 50s, the same. And in each case, the family had, in the fragmentary records that survived, mentioned the same odd detail, the detail that made the cold go all the way into me, which was that, in the weeks or months before the child vanished, the child had had a new friend. An imaginary friend. A friend the family had thought was sweet, a sign of a healthy imagination. I stopped, then, playing along. That was my mistake, or one of them, though I don't know if there was any right move to make. I told Nora that Tuesday wasn't real. I told her, gently but firmly, that Tuesday was just pretend, a make-believe friend, and that make-believe friends were fun. But we had to remember they weren't really there. And Nora looked at me with an expression I had never seen on my daughter's face, an expression that did not belong on the face of a 4-year-old, a kind of pity, a kind of sad grown-up knowing, and she said, Tuesday said you would say that. She said you wouldn't be able to see her because you're too big and too scared, and that all the mommies say it isn't real, and that it's okay. I don't have to make you believe. And then she patted my hand. My 4-year-old daughter patted my hand the way you'd comfort a child, and she went back to playing. And I sat there with my heart pounding and my unborn baby inside me, and the understanding settling over me that something in my house had gotten to my daughter, had been getting to her for weeks, and had already planned for the moment I would try to intervene and had prepared her for it. Had, there was a night after that that I have not told anyone about, that I will only tell you. I woke in the small hours to Nora's voice. Not crying, not calling, just talking. Her happy, chattering play voice from her room down the hall at 2 in the morning. And I got up to go to her, thinking she'd woken and was playing. And I came to her door, which was open, and her room was dark, and Nora was sitting up in her bed in the dark, facing the corner, the far corner where the closet was. And she was talking, animated, delighted, the way she talked to Tuesday all day long, telling some story, laughing. And I stood in the doorway and I watched, but I stood there a moment too long. And in the pause when Nora finished whatever she was saying, in the little silence a child leaves when they're waiting for an answer in a game of pretend, I heard from the corner an answer. Not words. I could not have sworn to words, but a sound, low, soft, in the register of a voice, in the shape of a reply, from the dark corner of my daughter's room, and Nora laughed at it, the delighted laugh of a child whose friend has said something funny, and I have gone over that sound 10,000 times, and I cannot make it into the house settling, or the wind, or a car outside. It was a voice. It was low. This is our time. And I said, whose time, baby? And she said, mine and Tuesday's. Tuesday says nighttime is our time. When you're asleep, that's when we can really play. And I turned on the light, and the corner was empty. Of course the corner was empty, and I took Nora into my bed for the rest of that night and held her while she slept. And I lay awake, because I understood now that whatever it was, it did not only come in the safe, bright daytime as a game. It came at night. It came when I was asleep. It had been coming to my daughter's room in the dark, for who knew how long, while I slept down the hall, and Nora had not told me, because Tuesday had asked her not to, because nighttime was their time, and I was not part of it, and I was not meant to know. I want to tell you that I did something dramatic and effective. I want to tell you that I found the answer, banished the thing, saved my child. But this is not that kind of story, and I think you already know that, because those stories are told by people who won, and I have not won. I am only still in the middle of it, fighting a war that no one else can even see, against an enemy no one else believes in, for a child who does not want to be saved because she loves her friend. Because that is the horror of it, the real horror, worse than the missing children in the records, worse than the cold old wants in Nora's cheerful voice. My daughter loves Tuesday. Tuesday is patient and kind and endlessly available, and she never gets tired or cross or too busy the way I do. She is always there, always wanting to play, always telling Nora she's special, that she's chosen, that she's the only friend Tuesday has ever wanted to keep. What child could resist that? What child, offered a friend who thinks she is the center of the world, would choose her ordinary tired mother instead? I am competing for my daughter's heart against the thing that has had centuries to learn exactly how to win a child, and I am losing. I am losing slowly and gently and lovingly, and there is nothing to fight, no monster to lock the door against. Only my little girl getting up in the morning, happy to go play with her friend. And me, watching. And she is changing. That is the thing I can least bear to write, and the thing I most need you to know, because it is the slowest and the worst of it. My Nora, my bright, ordinary, chaotic 4-year-old, is becoming, by small degrees, someone a little quieter, a little older, a little further away. She uses words she shouldn't have, old words, formal words, and when I ask where she heard them, she says Tuesday, and they sit in her small mouth like stones. She has grown calm in a way that a 4-year-old should not be calm, patient in a way she never was, and she watches me sometimes, over her breakfast, with a still considering look that is not the look of my daughter, a look that seems to be measuring me, or pitying me, or saying goodbye to me. She talks about the always place the way a child talks about a trip that's been promised, with a settled, happy certainty. Soon, she says. We're going soon, Tuesday says, when the baby comes. I can go, because then you'll have the baby and you won't be so sad. And I have to sit very still when she says these things, so that she will not see me come apart. Because I understand what she is telling me. She is telling me the friend has set a date. She has stopped, mostly, needing me. That is how I measure it, the loss, day by day. A 4-year-old needs her mother constantly for everything, and it is exhausting, and it is the whole of your life, and you would not trade it for anything. And Nora needs me less every week. She can entertain herself for hours now, contentedly, because she is not alone. She has Tuesday, and she comes to me less, calls for me less, climbs into my lap less, because the thing in the corner gives her everything she used to come to me for, and gives it without the tiredness and the crossness and the human limits that I, being only her mother, cannot help. I am being replaced, gently, lovingly, without a single dramatic moment I could point to. I am being replaced in my own daughter's heart by a patient old thing that has all the time in the world. And by the time she goes to the always place, I am afraid she will go gladly, will barely look back, because by then the friend will be her whole world, and I will be only the tired, sad lady who used to make her breakfast. And there is the baby. I try not to think about the baby growing inside me, coming in the spring, but I cannot stop because of the thing Nora said, the thing about how she can go once the baby comes. And I have turned it over and over, and I have understood the arithmetic of it. The patient, dreadful economy. It is not only that it wants me left with a child to soften the loss of Nora, it is that a baby is another child, that the friend takes one every few decades, one child, and then waits, patient, for the house to fill with children again, and I am about to give it a house with a 4-year-old. It has almost finished winning, and an infant coming in the spring. A whole new, small, unguarded soul arriving into the very rooms where it lives, and I do not think it will be satisfied with Nora. And so even if I somehow saved Nora, even if the move worked, even if I pulled her back from the always place at the last moment, there would still be the baby, and the years, and the friend, patient in the walls, waiting for the next child to be old enough to make a friend out of the air. It does not lose. That is the thing I have finally understood. It plays a game that is measured in generations, and a mother's love is measured in the span of her own single desperate life. And those are not a fair match. They have never been a fair match, and it knows it. And it can afford to be gentle and patient and kind, because it has already, always, won. The dream started for me around then. I began to dream at night of being small, of being in this house when it was not quite this house, of a friend in the corner, a friend I couldn't quite see, a friend who wanted me to come and stay and play in the always place. And I would wake with the dream dissolving and a name on the edge of my mind that wasn't Tuesday but was older, too old to say, and a feeling I couldn't place, a feeling of having forgotten something or someone a long time ago. And I called my mother and I asked her carefully whether I'd had an imaginary friend as a child, and she said yes. "Oh yes, you did, don't you remember?" And I said no, and I asked its name, and my mother was quiet for a long moment, a longer moment than the question deserved. And then she said, in a strange, flat voice, "I don't remember, honey." And I said, "Mom." And she said, "I don't want to talk about that time." And she changed the subject. And I understood that there was a room in my mother's memory with the door shut, the same as there was in mine, and that whatever was in it had to do with a friend, and with this house, because I grew up in this house. I had forgotten that too. I don't remember what happened when I was 5. I don't remember the friend, but I remember, or I have started to remember, in the dreams that I had a little brother, and I have looked, and there is no little brother, no record of him, no photographs, no grave. My mother had one child. Everyone agrees, me, only me, except that in a box of my mother's old things, the things she gave me when we thought she was downsizing, there is a single photograph from that time, from this house, from when I was small, and in it my young mother stands in the front yard of this house holding my hand, and I am 4 or 5, and I am smiling, and beside me, where my mother's other hand rests at her side, there is a gap, a space, A place in the composition where the eye expects another small figure because my mother's hand is curved, held out and down and open the way you hold it when a small child's hand is in it. Except there is no child there. There is nothing there. Just the grass and the gap, and my mother's open, curved, empty hand reaching for a hand that isn't in the picture. And on the back, in my mother's young handwriting, is the date. And below it, the beginning of a sentence, 3 words, and then a long scratch where the pen has gone back and forth, obliterating whatever came next. The 3 words are the last one. The last one, and then the scratched out dark, and I have held that photograph up to the light and tried to read what's under the scratching, and I cannot. And I have never asked my mother about the gap in the picture or the hand reaching for nothing or the last one because I am afraid. I am afraid of the shut door in her voice, and I am afraid of what is behind it, which I think is a small figure that was cut out of the photograph and cut out of the family. But in the dreams there is a little brother, small, younger than me, and there is the friend, and there is the always place, and there is a day, right after which we moved away and never spoke of it, a day I cannot reach, that sits behind the shut door in my mother's voice and mine. And I am afraid, I am so afraid, that the reason I was not taken, the reason I grew up, is that the friend took my brother instead. So here is my warning, and it is not much, and I am sorry, because I don't think warnings help with this. I think this thing is older and more patient than any warning. But if your child makes a friend out of the air, a sweet imaginary friend, and you are proud of their bright imagination, watch. Listen to what the friend says in your child's mouth. If the friend is a mirror of your child, their likes, their fears, a chair with a name, then be at peace. It's only the ordinary magic of a small mind. But if the friend has its own history, its own old sadness, its own patient wants, if the friend knows things your child could not know, if the friend lived in the house before the house, if the friend wants your child to come and stay and play forever in a nice place, an always place, then you are not watching your child's imagination. You are watching your child being courted, and the thing courting them has all the time in the world, and it is better at loving your child than you are, because loving your child is all it does, and all it has done, for 100 years, to 100 children, one every few decades, one every time it gets hungry. And there is nothing to lock out and nothing to fight. There is only your little girl, happy, in the corner, laughing with her friend, drifting a little further. I am not going to be able to save her by fighting, because there is nothing to fight. So I am doing the only thing I can think of. I am going to move. I am going to take Nora out of this house, the way my mother took me, right after. And I am going to hope that distance is enough, that the friend cannot follow, that it belongs to the house and the house alone. But I am afraid, because Nora says Tuesday can come with us. Nora says Tuesday is her friend now, not the house's, and that friends go where you go. And I don't know if that's true, or if it's just what a 4-year-old would say, or if it's what Tuesday told her to say, to keep me from running while there's still time. I am going to try anyway. We leave next week. The boxes are half packed in the hall as I tell you this, and Nora watches me pack them with a calm that is worse than any tantrum. And yesterday she looked up from the floor where she was playing and she said, in that settled, happy, certain voice, Tuesday says it's okay that we're moving. Tuesday says she doesn't mind. And I stopped, with a plate wrapped in newspaper in my hands, and I made myself ask, lightly, oh, she doesn't mind us leaving her behind? And Nora laughed, the delighted laugh, the laugh at a mother who has understood nothing, and she said, Mommy, she's not staying here. She's coming with us. She goes where I go now. We're best friends. And she went back to her playing, and I stood in my half-packed house with the plate in my hands, and I understood that the move was already, probably, useless, that I had waited too long, that whatever tie the friend needed to make with the child it had made with mine, that it was no longer the house's, it was Nora's, or Nora was its, and that I could take my daughter to the other side of the world and unpack our box. But I have to try, because the alternative is to stay in the house where it first found her, and simply wait for the night she doesn't come back from the basement. And I cannot do that. I have to do something, even something that won't work, because she is my daughter and I love her, and love has to at least try, even against a thing that love cannot beat. Even so, we leave next week, and I will unpack her boxes, and I will watch her, and I will pray to be wrong, and I will listen every evening in the new house to hear whether my daughter has started again to laugh at something in the corner that only she can see. If you have children, hold them tonight, listen to their friends, and if the friend is too old and too patient and too kind and wants them to come and stay and play forever, do not be proud of their imagination. Be afraid and run while you still can and pray that it belongs to the house. Pray it can't follow. And know the tell, the one that separates the harmless magic of a child's imagination from the thing that came from mine, so that if it is ever in your house, you will know it sooner than I did. An imaginary friend wants what your child wants. It is a companion in play, but the thing that took my Nora did not want to play. It wanted her to come. It wanted her to stay. It wanted her in a nice place, an always place, forever. And everything else, the games, the sweetness, the years of patient courting, was only the long road to that one cold want. If your child's friend ever, once, in all its make-believe, wants your child to go somewhere with it, to come and stay, to leave and not come back, then it is not a friend at all, and you must not be gentle, and you must not wait, and you must not tell yourself it's just a phase. You must take your child and go. Good night. Kiss your children. Listen to who they're talking to in the dark. And if the friend they made out of the air ever asks them to come and stay forever, do not sleep another night in that house. Story 6. The counting. You will not remember the first night you heard it, and that is part of how it works. That is the cruelty built into the very beginning of it. Because on the first night, the number was so small and the voice was so far away, and you were so nearly asleep that it folded itself into the ordinary sounds of your house settling in the dark. And you never marked it, never woke, never thought, there is a voice counting somewhere in my home. It was 1, or it was 2. A soft, low, patient voice, somewhere below you, somewhere far off, saying a small number into the dark. And you slept through it, the way you have slept through it your whole life, the way, perhaps, you are sleeping through it now. It is only later, weeks later, months later, that you begin to hear it, and by then the number is not small anymore. Let me tell you how it comes to you, because it comes to everyone the same way, and because if you know the shape of it, you may, unlike almost everyone, have a little warning. You will be lying in your bed one night, in that soft country between waking and sleep, and you will become aware, the way you become aware of a clock you have stopped hearing, that there is a sound in your house that you have been not hearing for a long time. A voice, low and even and unhurried, and it will be counting. You will lie very still, the way you do when you first notice a thing you are not sure is real, and you will listen, and you will hear it reach a number, some ordinary number, 40 or 50, and pause, and then go on to the next, and the next, slow and patient and certain, counting up one number at a time in the dark from somewhere else in your house. And your first thought will be the reasonable one. A neighbor, a television left on, a radio, a dream not yet finished. And you will get up because you cannot help it, and you will go looking for the source of the counting through your dark house, and this is the first thing that will frighten you, truly frighten you, because as you move through the house, the counting does not get louder in any room. It is not coming from the television, which is off. It is not coming from outside, where the night is silent. It is not coming from any room you enter, because the moment you enter a room, the counting seems to be coming from the next one, always the next one, always just beyond the wall you were standing at, so that you could walk through your house all night, room to room, chasing a low, patient voice counting in the dark, and never once stand in the room where it is, because it is not in any room. It is in the house. It is in the walls, in the space between the rooms, in the place your house keeps that has no door, and it is counting, And when you finally give up and go back to your bed and lie down and listen, it is still going. Higher now, 60, 61, 62. Patient, unhurried, certain, all night long. And you will notice on that first night of chasing it through your own dark house, a thing that you will spend weeks trying to unremember. The counting does not care that you are looking for it. A burglar goes quiet when you get up. A leak, a settling beam, a branch on a window. These are indifferent. They do not know you are there. But the counting is neither. It does not hide from you, and it does not ignore you. It waits when you stop in a doorway to listen. It pauses just for a moment, a held breath in the dark, as though it has noticed you noticing, as though it is aware of you moving through the house toward it. And then, when you move on, it resumes from exactly the number it paused on, never losing its place. And there is an attention in that pause. And you will feel watched that first night, chasing the count from room to room, and you will be right. It is not only counting in your house, it is counting in your house at you. And it has been waiting a long time for the night you would get up and come looking, because your coming to look is the first proof that you have started, at last, to hear the number. And the number, by then, is so much higher than you know. You will not sleep well after the night you first hear it. No one does. And in the days that follow, you will do the things people do. You will look for the leak, the fault, the rational source. You will check for a stuck radio, a phone playing something, a neighbor through a shared wall. You will find nothing. You will, if you are like most people, begin to wonder about yourself, about your mind, about whether a person can hallucinate a voice, and you will look that up late at night and be frightened by what you read. And you will not tell anyone, because the only thing worse than a voice counting in your walls is everyone deciding you are the kind of person who hears voices counting in their walls. So you will keep it to yourself. You will lie awake and listen to the number climb. I know all of this because a woman kept a record once, and the record survived her, which is more than most of them leave. She lived in a house where the counting came, and she was a careful woman, a keeper of diaries. And when the counting began, she did the thing careful people do. She wrote it down every night, the number and the room, in a small hand in a notebook, and the notebook was found after. And I have read it, and I am giving you what it taught me. Her first entry says only, heard counting in the night, low, from downstairs, around 80. Slept badly. And then the entries go on, night after night, and you can watch, in her small, careful hand, the thing happened to her that is happening to you, or that will. 94, from the kitchen. 112, from the stairs. 140, from the hall. And you can watch her mind do exactly what yours will do, the reasonable explanations giving way, week by week, to the cold understanding, until somewhere past 200, the handwriting changes, gets smaller, gets tighter, and the entries stop being observations and start being arithmetic. She began, you see, to calculate. She had worked out, from the rate the number climbed and the rate the voice approached, roughly how many nights she had. She wrote it down. 41 nights, she wrote, if it keeps this pace, and then the next night, 40, and the next, 39. She counted down her own nights in the back of the notebook while the thing counted up its number in her walls, the two of them keeping their tallies in the dark and reading it. You understand that this is the true horror of the counting, not the voice, not even the arrival, but the arithmetic, the way it makes you do the sum yourself, the way it makes you the keeper of your own countdown, crossing off your own nights in your own hand. And there is a passage in the middle of her notebook where the observations have not quite yet given way entirely to the counting down, where she wrote something I have never been able to forget, a single line on its own, that I think is the truest thing anyone has ever written about the thing that counts. She wrote, I have stopped being afraid of the last number. I have started being afraid of how much I have come to need to hear the next one. And I understood, reading it, the final cruelty, the one the diary woman had discovered too late, which is that the counting, if you live with it long enough, stops being a thing you dread and becomes a thing you wait for, a companion in the dark, the one reliable presence in a life it has isolated you from everyone else in. Because no one else hears it, no one else believes it. Her last entries are very short. 3 nights. It's in the bedroom now. 2 nights. It's beside the bed. And then one entry, the last, in handwriting barely a scrawl, that says only, "It's under the covers. It's at my feet. Tomorrow it reaches the..." And the sentence stops there, unfinished. And the next page is blank. And every page after it is blank. And no one ever saw her again. And the house was quiet after, truly quiet. Until, I have no doubt, some night not long after, at one, low, far off, it began again for whoever moved into that quiet, unhome. And here is the thing you will notice. The thing that turns the fear into something colder. The thing that no one who has not lived it can understand. The number is always higher than it was. Every night. You heard it in the 60s, that first night. A week later, it is in the 90s. A month later, it is past 200. It does not reset. It does not start over. Whatever is counting in your house began at 1 long ago, before you ever heard it, on a night you slept through, and it has been counting ever since. Every night, patient, relentless, never repeating, never resting, climbing, one number at a time, towards some number you do not know, and you have only now, late, far too late. There is a particular vertigo in that understanding, and you should be ready for it, because it will come to you in the deep of some sleepless night and it will take the floor out from under you. It is this: the counting did not begin the night you first heard it. You know that now. It was already in the hundreds when you first heard it, which means it had already been going, night after night, for hundreds of nights, for years, while you slept soundly beside it, unknowing, safe in your ignorance the way a person is safe who does not know the diagnosis they already have, every peaceful night of the last several years of your life. Every ordinary morning, every day you thought was fine, but counting was going on beneath it, in your walls, climbing, patient. And you did not hear it, and you were happy, and it was already coming. And you will lie there, and you will grieve, strangely, for that ignorance, for the version of you who slept through the low, far numbers and did not know, because that version of you is gone now, killed not by the counting, but by the hearing of it, and you can never go back to not hearing. You can never unhear a number once you have started, and the cruelest part is that the not hearing was never safety. It was. You will try to work out what the number means. Of course you will. You will lie awake and you will think, is it days? Is it counting the days of something? Is it counting up to a date? And you will try to find the pattern, the meaning, the key, and you will not find it, because the number is not counting days or years or anything you can measure. It is simply counting. It is counting the way a thing counts when it is very patient and has all the time in the world and knows exactly how the count will end, and does not need you to understand, only needs you to be there on the night it reaches the end. You will try, at some point, to prove it, to record it on your phone, laid on the nightstand through the long night, so that in the morning you will have it, the counting, saved, real, a thing you can hold up against your own doubt. And you will do this, and you will lie awake and hear it all night, 180, 181, and in the morning you will play the recording back with your heart going, and there will be nothing on it. Hours of the ordinary silence of a house at night, the refrigerator, a car passing, your own breathing, and not one number, not one word, because the counting does not travel through the air. It is not a sound in the room. It is a sound in you, meant for you, laid directly into the ear of the one it is counting toward. And that is how you will know, finally, that it is not the house. Others live in your house, perhaps, a husband, a child, and they sleep soundly through it all, have never heard a number, look at you with worry when you ask, did you hear counting last night? And their not hearing is not a mercy, it is a verdict, because it means the counting is not for them, it is for you. It has chosen you, out of everyone under your roof, and it comes only to your ear, and it counts only toward your bed, and there is no one you can wake who will hear it with you. Because the loneliest thing about the counting, lonelier than the fear, is that it is yours alone. Because the count has an end. You will come to know this, the way you come to know all of it, not by being told, but by feeling it in the marrow of the small hours. The count is climbing toward a number, a specific number, the last number, and you do not know what it is, but the thing counting does, and when it reaches it, the counting will stop. And you understand, without anyone ever telling you, that you do not want to be in the house on the night the counting stops, that the stopping is the thing, that all those nights of patient climbing were only ever the approach, the long, slow walk up to a door, and that the last number is the door, and that when the voice reaches it and falls silent, in that first total silence after so many nights of counting, the thing that has been counting will, at last, be finished counting, and will do, in the silence, whatever it is that it has been counting. And there is worse, because the number is not the only thing that climbs. The counting moves. That first night, it came from far off, from below you, from the basement or the far end of the house, distant through walls and floors. But as the weeks go on, as the number rises, the counting comes from nearer, from the floor below you, and then from down the hall, and then from the next room. The voice patient and low and even, closer and closer through your house night by night as the number climbs, so that you understand that the two things are moving together, the number toward its end and the voice toward your room, and that they will arrive together, that on the night the count reaches its last number, you will do the arithmetic. You will not be able to help it, the way the woman with the clock could not help counting the doors, the way you cannot help, right now, some part of you, wondering what number you would hear if you listened. You will lie awake and you will note the number each night, and you will see how fast it climbs, and you will note how much nearer the voice is each night, from what room, and you will try to calculate from the rate of the number and the rate of the approach how many nights you have left before they converge, before the count reaches its end in the room where you sleep. And you will get a number, a rough number, a number of nights, and you will lie in your bed each night crossing another one off, listening to the counting come nearer, listening to the tally climb, doing the most terrible arithmetic a person can do, the arithmetic of your own remaining nights. And you will understand at last why the thing does not hide the count, why it lets you hear it, why it comes to you audibly night after night when it could so easily be silent, because the fear is the point. Because a thing this patient does not merely want to arrive. It wants you to hear it coming. It wants you to count along. You will try to leave. Everyone tries to leave. And I will tell you what happens when you leave, because it is the last cruelty, the one that closes the trap. You will pack a bag and you will go to a hotel, or to a friend's house, or to your mother's, anywhere, out of the house, away from the walls where the counting lives, and you will lie down in a strange, safe bed far from your home, and you will feel, for the first time in weeks, the relief of silence, and you will begin to think you have escaped. And then, in the deepest part of that first night away, you will hear it, low, patient, even, from somewhere in the strange safe house, from the next room, from below you, counting, and it will be at the number it was at, the number it reached the last night you heard it at home. It has not reset. It has not lost its place. It has followed you, because it was never counting in your house. It was counting toward you, and you are the thing it is approaching. So you will go home. There is no point in the hotel. You will go home to your own bed, and you will lie in it and listen to the number climb, closer every night, higher every night, and you will cross off your nights, and you will not tell anyone, and you will wait, because there is nothing else to do, because you cannot outrun a thing that counts toward you and not toward a place, because the count is not measuring the distance from the. You will try other things. Everyone tries. You will try earplugs and headphones and music turned up loud enough to drown it, and you will learn what the diary woman learned, that the counting is not louder than your music. It is simply under it, inside it, behind it, in the place your own hearing lives, and no volume in the world can put a wall between you and a sound that is being spoken directly into you. You will try to stay awake, to never sleep, to hold the last night off by never letting a night fully close, and you will learn, as everyone learns, that this is the worst idea of all, because the counting does not need you asleep. It never needed you asleep, and staying awake only means you are awake to hear it, clearer and nearer every hour, and awake to feel the exhaustion pull you down. And you will think, some desperate night, of the thing that seems so clever and is the most dangerous of all. You will think, what if I count back? What if I answer it? What if, when it says 240, I say 241, or I say 1, or I say, stop? What if I speak into the dark and let it know I hear it? Let it know I am counting too. And you must not. I am telling you this as the one clear rule in a thing that has no rules, the one mercy I can offer you. Do not count back. Do not answer the number, because the counting is a question it has been asking you every night, patient, low. Will you count with me? Will you count with me? And every night that you lie still and afraid and silent, you are answering no. And no is the only answer that keeps the distance. The night you answer, the night you say a number back into the dark. You have said yes, you have joined the count, you have taken up the tally yourself, and the diary woman, I think, at the very end, in the room with it, under her covers, at her feet. I think she answered. I think that is what the last unfinished line means. I think she finally, exhausted, terrified, said the next number, just to make it stop, just to answer. And the count did not need to reach its own end after that, because she had reached it for it. She had said yes. And yes is the last number. Yes is the only number the counting has ever actually been climbing toward, and it does not matter how high you thought it had to go. And I should tell you what the last nights are like as much as anyone can, because the diary woman wrote them, and because you should know, if you are the one with the short number, what is coming, so that it does not take you unaware. In the last nights, the voice is in your room, not down the hall anymore, not through the wall, but in your room, in the dark with you, low and patient and near, counting. And you will lie in your bed and hear it from the corner, and then from the foot of the bed, and then, on the last nights, from beside you, from the pillow beside your head, so close that you can feel, or think you can feel, the small stir of air and you will not be able to move. That is what she wrote, and I believe it, that in the last nights a stillness comes over you, a heaviness, and you lie there awake and aware and unable to lift your own hand, while the voice counts beside you, nearer each night, patient each night, and the numbers now are so high, and the end is so close, in some terrible tired part of you, the part that has come to need the next number, the part that is so weak, and that wanting is the last thing it needs from you. That wanting is the door. And I think that on the very last night, when the voice counts the last number but one into your ear, in the dark, beside your head, the tired wanting part of you says the last number itself, softly, almost gratefully, the way you finish a prayer you have said 10,000 times. And then there is silence, real silence, the first true silence in months. I do not know what happens in the last night. That is the one thing I cannot tell you, because the ones who reach the last night do not come back to say, and the count, for them, simply stops, and they are, in the morning, gone or found or changed, and the house is quiet, truly quiet, for the first time in a long time, until it starts again, at one, low, far off, on a night the next sleeper in that bed will. No one knows what it is. I want to be honest with you about that, because everything else I have told you is as certain as such things can be, but this part is only what I have come to believe. I do not think it belongs to any house. I think that is the mistake everyone makes, thinking it is in the walls, thinking that if they could only find the room, seal the space, leave the address, they would be free of it. I think it is not in the house at all. I think it is in the world, everywhere, always. A low patient counting under everything. and that it is counting all of us, everyone, all the time, each of us with our own number, our own tally begun on some night in our childhood we do not remember, climbing slowly all our lives. And I think the reason most people live and die and never hear it is not that it is not counting them. It is that most people's number is very high, higher than a life is long, so that the count is still in its low, far-off patient, hundreds when they die, quietly of ordinary things, of age, of illness, in a world that never once let them hear the counting that was always, faintly, going on under their whole existence. Those are the lucky ones. Those are almost everyone. They sleep straight through their entire count, from the first number to the last night of their lives, and the count is nowhere near its end, and they never know. And that not knowing is the greatest mercy the world has to give. And it does not come to everyone as numbers. That is a thing I have learned, gathering the accounts, the diaries, the few fragments, the ones who heard it left behind before the last night took them. To some it comes as counting, the plain patient recitation of the numbers, 1, 2, 3, climbing in the dark. But to others it comes as a bell, a slow tolling from somewhere in the house, one stroke, and then, after a patient while, another and another. The same climbing tally rung out in iron instead of spoken. To others it is a name, their own name, said over and over in the dark, once a night at first, and then twice, and then more. The count kept not in numbers, but in the number of times the voice says who you are. And to a few, the oldest accounts say, it came as a knocking, soft, from the walls, a patient tally of knocks that climb night by night toward some final unbearable sum. But it is always the same thing underneath. Whatever mask it wears, whatever your particular ear translates it into, it is always patient. It is always climbing. It is always coming nearer through the house night by night, and it is always, always meant for one person, spoken into one ear, counting toward one bed, and no one else in the house ever hears the bell, or the name, or the knocking, or the count, because it is not a sound in the world, it is a summons, and a summons is addressed. I think it is very old. Older than houses, older than counting itself perhaps, a thing that was here before. There were people to hear it and gave it names. The names are all through the old records if you know how to look. The counting sickness, the tally that comes in the night, the reckoning, and always the same warnings attached. Do not answer it. Do not say the number back. Keep the house full of sound. Do not sleep alone in the quiet, and always the same helpless ending. That those who heard it were, in the end, taken or gone. It has been counting us since before we had the word for it. It is counting still, under everything, under every quiet house, on every quiet street, a low patient reckoning that most will never hear, and a few will hear too well. But some of us have a short number. I do not know why. I do not know how it is decided, or if it is decided at all, or if it is only the blind arithmetic of a thing that started counting each of us at 1. And simply, in some of us, was always going to reach the end within a lifetime. But some of us have a short number, and for us the count catches up while we are still alive to hear it. And there comes a night, in our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, when the number has climbed high enough and near enough that at last, in this soft country before sleep, we hear it, low and even and patient, from somewhere in the house, and we lie very still, and from that night we are no longer the lucky ones. We are the ones whose count will finish in our own hearing, in our own bed, on a night we can number, and we spend what is left of our short number doing the arithmetic and waiting and not counting back. I think it is counting you. I think it is counting all of you, every one of you drifting towards sleep in the quiet dark with my voice in your ear. And for almost all of you, the number is high and far, and you will never hear it. And you will live a long, ordinary life under a counting you are blessed never to notice. And I am glad, I am so glad, for the almost all of you. But somewhere among you, tonight, is one whose number is short, who has been feeling for weeks that there is a sound in the house that they have been not hearing for a long time, and who is lying here right now at the edge of sleep, beginning, for the very first time, to actually listen. Because that is why I am telling you this, in this voice, in this quiet hour, while you drift. Not as a story, as a question. Because you have been lying here, listening to me, growing sleepy, and somewhere under my voice, under the ordinary sounds of your own house settling in the dark, there may be another sound, low and even and patient, that you have been not hearing for a long time, the way you have not heard so many things, and I want you, just once, just now, before you sleep, to listen for it, to be very still and very quiet, and to listen, past my voice, into your own house, into the dark between your own rooms, and to hear whether somewhere far off, or perhaps not so far off anymore, something has been counting. And if you hear it, do not be afraid of the number. Be afraid of how near the voice is. And be afraid, most of all, that you are only hearing it now, tonight, for the first time, which means it has been counting toward you, patient and certain, for longer than you have known, and has come, in all the nights you slept straight through, a very, very long way. Listen. Is something counting? How high has it gotten? And which room is it in? And here's the last thing. The thing I have saved for the end. Because it is the thing I most need you to carry with you into sleep. If you listen just now, into the dark of your own house, and you heard nothing, only the ordinary quiet, then be at peace and be grateful, because your number is long, longer than your life, and you are one of the almost everyone, and the counting under your house is still so far down in its patient hundreds that you will never live to hear it climb. Sleep well, and forget me, and forget all of this the way you are meant to. But if you listened, and somewhere, faint, far off, or perhaps not so far off, under the ordinary quiet you thought, for just a moment, that you heard it, a low, even patient voice saying a number into the dark of your own home, then do not tell yourself it was my voice. It was your imagination. It was the story getting under your skin. Lie very still. Note the number. Note the room. And know that you are not one of the almost everyone after all, that your number is short, that it has begun tonight for you, and that from this night on, you are the keeper of your own count. Good night. Sleep well, if the counting lets you. And whatever you do, do not in the dark begin to count along. It so likes it when you count along. Story 7. Something is wearing my husband. My husband came home wrong on an ordinary Thursday in October, and I have spent every day since trying to explain to myself how a person can be completely, unmistakably himself, and also completely, unmistakably not. And I have not found the words, and I have given up looking for them, because I understand now that there are no words for it, that this is precisely the trap. Let me tell you about the Thursday, because it is where it started, though I did not know it then. Daniel drove out to his brother's place that evening, an hour away, to help with something, a fence, a truck, one of the small ordinary errands of a long marriage that you don't even fully register. He was supposed to be home by 9. He came home at a little after 1 in the morning, and when I asked, sleepy and only mildly annoyed, where he'd been, he stood in the doorway of our bedroom in the dark. And there was a pause, a beat too long, and then he said he'd fallen asleep in the car. On the side of the road, he'd gotten tired driving back, he said, and pulled over to rest his eyes, and slept for hours, and woke up confused and drove home. And it was a perfectly reasonable thing to say. People do it, and I was half asleep. And I said, you should have called. And he said, sorry, love, and got into bed, and I did not think about it again for days. But I have thought about it every day since, because his shoes, the next morning, were caked in mud, thick pale mud, and there is no mud on the side of a highway. And his brother later said Daniel had left his place at 8, right on time, meaning the hour drive home had somehow taken 5 hours. And there is a stretch of those 5 hours, from 8 until a little after 1, that Daniel cannot account for, that he has never been able to account for. that he waves away with the story about something happened to my husband in those 5 hours on that Thursday in October, somewhere off a dark road in the mud, and something came back in his place. Not instead of him. That is the thing I need you to understand. The thing that makes this so much worse than a ghost story, than a possession in the way you think of possession. It did not replace Daniel. Daniel is still here. It is wearing him. It has moved into him the way you move into a house, and Daniel is still in there. And it is living his life, using his body, sleeping in our bed, kissing our children goodnight, and being, to everyone in the entire world except me, my husband, exactly, perfectly, my husband. You have to know what he was, my Daniel, for you to feel the size of what I've lost, because a stranger walking wrong would be frightening. But a beloved husband walking wrong is a grief with no name and no funeral. We met when we were 23, and we had grown up together in the way that people who marry young do, become each other's context, each other's home. He was a warm man, an easy man, a man who filled a room without trying, who remembered the names of everyone's children and the dates of everyone's losses, who could not pass our own children without touching their heads, a small unconscious blessing, 100 times a day. He was the one who cried at movies I found silly. He was the one who got up first with the kids when they were babies so I could sleep. He had a particular way of saying my name when he came home, 2 syllables, a small rising warmth on the second one that told me before I saw his face that he was glad to be home, that I was what home meant to him, and he said it that way for 22 years, 10,000 times, and I never once got tired of it. The thing wearing him says my name correctly now, the right 2 syllables, but not the warmth on the second one, not the rising, or when there is warmth it is applied, laid on, like a man who has studied a recording of how the name should sound and reproduces the tune without knowing why it goes up at the end. And that, of everything, of all the small wrong things, is the one that undoes me. Because that little rise in my own name was the sound of being loved, was the private daily proof of 22 years, and it is gone. And the thing that took it does not even know what it took, does not know that the tune means anything, only that it is part of the performance and reproduce. The wrongnesses are small. That is the cruelty of it, that each one alone is nothing, is madness to even mention, is the kind of thing that would make anyone I told them to look at me with soft, frightened concern. He holds his coffee cup in the wrong hand now. Just sometimes. Daniel is right-handed, has always cradled his morning coffee in his right hand while he reads on his phone with the left. 22 years, every morning. And now, some mornings, the cup is in his left hand and he doesn't notice. And when I mentioned it, lightly, he looked at his own hand holding the cup as though it were a small surprise and switched it and said, "Huh." He laughs at the wrong times, a half-second late, always, as though the laugh is a response he has to recognize the cue for and produce, rather than a thing that bursts out of him. And the laugh itself is right. It is Daniel's laugh, the exact sound. But it arrives just after the joke instead of on it, just after. Every time. Like a translation. Like a thing being played back. He has forgotten the private language of our marriage, the shorthand, the references, the 22 years of inside jokes. And when I use one, he smiles and goes along, warm, loving, and gives nothing back. Because he does not have it. It did not come across. Whatever came back from the mud got his face and his voice and his laugh and the broad facts of his life. But not the small, warm. And he watches me. That is the worst of the small things, the one I cannot bear. When he thinks I am not looking, when I am at the stove or reading or half asleep, I feel it, the particular pressure of being looked at, and I glance up, and Daniel is watching me. And his face, in the instant before he knows I've caught him, is not the face of a man watching his wife. It is the face of a thing studying a specimen. Blank, attentive, cold, learning. And then he sees me see him, and the face comes on, the warm Daniel face, the smile. "Hey, love," and it is seamless. It is instant. It is perfect. and it is a mask being put on, and I have seen for a quarter of a second 100 times now what is behind it when it thinks no one is looking, and it is nothing that has ever loved me. There were other things. He sleeps wrong, or rather, he does not seem to need sleep the way a body does. He lies still through the night in a way Daniel never did. Daniel, who thrashed and muttered and stole the blankets for 22 years, and now the shape beside me is still, all night, too still. Not the stillness of deep sleep, but the stillness of a thing that is only pretending to sleep, because that is what he eats without pleasure. Cleanse his plate with a mechanical efficiency when Daniel had made a small happy sound over good food his whole life. He goes into rooms and stands in them when I come upon him unexpectedly, standing in the middle of the dining room or the hall doing nothing, facing nothing. And when he hears me, he starts and animates and becomes busy, becomes Daniel, as though I have switched him on. And once, only once, I heard him practicing. I came home early and the house was quiet, and I heard, from the bedroom, Daniel's voice, low, saying my name, over and over. That two-syllable name, trying it again and again, with the rise and without. Hey love, hey love, hey love, hey love, a dozen times. A man alone in a room rehearsing how to greet his wife. And I stood in my own hallway and listened to the thing wearing my husband practice, being glad to see me. I could not tell anyone. You understand that already, I think, because you have been listening to these stories, and you know the shape of the trap by now, the way the horror seals you in with it by being unspeakable. Because Daniel is right here, alive, healthy, functioning, going to work, being funny at dinner, coaching our son's team, exactly himself to every eye but mine. What would I say? My husband is my husband, but he isn't. He holds his coffee in the wrong hand. He laughs half a second late. There is no sentence I could say that would not end with my own family, gently, lovingly, deciding that grief or stress or something chemical had come loose in me, that the woman insisting her perfectly fine husband had been replaced from the inside was the one who needed help, and the children know. That is the thing that first told me I was not imagining it, before the tests, before any of it. Because children have not yet learned to talk themselves out of what they feel. And my children felt it before I let myself, the baby, our youngest, who had reached for her father from the day she could reach, who lit up at the sight of him, began, in the weeks after October, to cry when he held her. Not fuss, cry, the deep frightened cry she gave for strangers, in the arms of the father she had loved her whole small life. And it wearing him would hold her and make the soothing sounds, correctly, the right sounds, and she would scream and reach past it, for me, over its shoulder, staring at its face with the pure, unguarded terror only a baby can show, the terror of a creature who has not yet been taught that and it would hand her to me, smiling, saying, "She's cranky today," and I would take my screaming baby and feel her go quiet against me and feel her small body still shaking, and I would know. And her son, who is 7, and old enough to have learned to doubt himself, came to me one evening, quiet, troubled, and asked me a question that I have not been able to stop hearing. He said, "Mom, is Dad okay?" And I said, "Why, baby?" And he looked at the floor, and he said, "He feels like he's pretending." And I asked him what he meant, gently, my heart going, and he struggled, the way you struggle to say a thing you have no words for. And finally he said, when he tucks me in, he says all the right things, but it's like he learned them. Like when I do my lines for the school play. He says goodnight like it's his lines. And then he looked up at me, my 7-year-old, with a fear in his face that a child should never have to feel about his own father. And he said, "Don't tell him I said that." And I understood that my son had felt the mask, had felt the performance, had felt his father learning to be his father the way a child learns lines, and had known, without any way to know, to be afraid. I told him Dad was just tired. I told him everything was fine. And that night, I stood in the hall and listened to it tuck my son in, and it said all the right things. "Good night, sleep tight, I love you, buddy," in Daniel's voice. And my son said them back, small and careful, performing being unafraid for the thing performing being his father, the two of them running their lines at each other in the dark. and I have never felt so. And Daniel, the thing wearing Daniel, knows this. It counts on it. It has arranged, simply by being a good enough performance to fool everyone else, that any alarm I raise will land on me and not on it. It has made me the unreliable one. It did that without a single overt move, just by being convincing. And it is a strategy so patient and so complete that I understood, when I finally saw it, that whatever this thing is, it has done this before, many times, that it knows exactly how a household works and how a wife's certainty can be turned into a wife's hysteria. And that I was not the first woman to lie awake beside a warm, familiar stranger. I started, in those first weeks, to test it. I couldn't help it. I would ask him things, small things, private things, things only Daniel would know. The name of the motel we stayed at on our honeymoon. The thing our daughter said when she was 3, that we still, quote, the stupid song he sang me when we were dating. And here is the thing that frightened me most, that took it from grief madness into certainty. In the first days, it failed these. It would pause. That beat. Too long pause, and then guess, or deflect, or laugh and say, God, I don't remember. That was a lifetime ago. Warm, plausible, and wrong. Because Daniel remembered everything. Daniel was the rememberer of our marriage, the keeper of the small holy trivia of us. But as the weeks went on, it began to pass them. It began to know the motel, the quote, the song. And I realized, cold all the way through, that it was not remembering. It was learning. It was getting the answers from somewhere, and I understood, slowly, sickly, where, because the only place those answers lived was inside Daniel, inside the real Daniel, wherever he was in there. And the thing was, I think, going through him, room by room, opening every drawer of him, taking out our whole life together, one memory at a time, and learning it, so that it could be him more completely, so that the gaps I kept falling into. I tried to find out where he had been. Those 5 hours off the road in the mud, it was the one solid thing I had, the gap in the time, the one thing that was not a feeling but a fact. And I chased it the way you chase the one solid thing in a nightmare. I looked at his phone, the location history, the way you can. And there was a hole in it. A stretch from a little after 8 until a little after 1, where the phone simply had no data, no location, as though it had been off, or somewhere no signal reached. And then it reappeared. But before the hole, at 8:40, there was one last location, and it was not on the route home. It was a place I did not know. A rural road, a wooded place well off the highway between his brother's and ours. A place he had no reason to be. A place the map showed as nothing. No houses, no destination, just trees and a dirt track leading off the road into them. That was the last place my husband's phone knew him to be before the hole in the night. And I drove out there one afternoon in the daylight with my heart in my throat, and I found the dirt track, and I got out of my car, and I walked a little way in among the trees, and there was nothing there. Just woods. Just quiet. Just the pale mud. The same pale mud that had been caked on his shoes, thick underfoot in a way that soaked my own shoes in a moment. And standing there in the quiet trees and the pale mud where my husband had gone into the dark on a Thursday in October, and something had come back out wearing him, I felt it. The thing I have no proof of. And every certainty about, I felt watched, I felt studied, I felt the woods pay attention to me the way he pays attention to me when he thinks I am not looking. And I turned and I walked very fast back to my. Our anniversary came in November, 3 weeks after the Thursday, and it did the most frightening thing it has ever done, which was to be perfect. It had clearly, in the weeks before, gone through Daniel, found the anniversary, found what an anniversary meant, found how Daniel had marked them over 22 years, and it had prepared. It took me to the restaurant, the actual restaurant, the one from our first date, the one Daniel took me to on the big anniversaries, and it had booked the corner table, our table, and it had, somehow, arranged with the restaurant to play the song, our song, the stupid song from when we were dating. And across the table it looked at me in the candlelight, and it said all the things, the tender things, the things about how it couldn't imagine its life without me. And I sat across from it in the candlelight, and I performed being moved because I had to, because the waiter was smiling at us, and the other tables were glancing over at the sweet older couple so clearly still in love, and because if I did anything but glow back at my husband reciting his love to me on our anniversary, I would be the cold one, the strange one, the wife who wept for no reason at a beautiful dinner. So I smiled, and I reached across the table and took its hand, the hand that was Daniel's hand, and I said the things back, and I let a tear come to my eye that everyone in that restaurant read as joy, and that was in fact the purest grief and terror I have ever felt, because I was sitting in our restaurant at our table with our song playing, being told I was loved, perfectly, completely, by a thing that had learned the shape of. That was the night I understood I had already lost, in a way. Because it could do this now, it could be him this well. And the thing that can take you to your restaurant and play your song and tell you it loves you and make you cry in front of a room full of witnesses is a thing that has almost finished learning to be your husband. And there's no test left to fail it, no scene left to find, only the slow closing of the last small gaps. And the anniversary was the night I saw how few of them were left. And then, one night, Daniel came back. I have to tell you about this carefully because it is the thing I hold on to, and it is the thing that damns me. It was very late. The thing wearing him was asleep, or seemed to be, beside me, and I was lying awake, as I always am now, watching the shape of him in the dark, and he made a sound. A small broken sound. And he turned to me, and in the faint light from the window, I saw his face, and it was his. It was Daniel. Not the performance, not the mask, but him, my husband, his actual face awake and present and full of a terror I had never seen on it in 22 years. And he grabbed my arm, hard, his hand shaking, and he said in a rush, in a whisper, in his own real voice that I had not heard since October, he said, "It's still learning me, it's almost done. When I can't warn you anymore, that's how you'll know. And don't let it near the kids at night. It wants the kids. That's what it's for." I have not slept a full night since he told me. I lie awake between the thing wearing my husband and the hall that leads to my children's rooms, and I keep watch, because the one thing my real Daniel got out before it silenced him was a warning about the children. And whatever else is true, whatever I am or am not able to prove, I will not sleep through the night that thing decides it is done with him and ready for them. I have started keeping the children's doors locked from the inside, taught them it's a game. I have started sleeping in fragments, in shifts I keep alone, watching the dark. It is tried once that I know of. I was awake in one of my shifts, lying still and pretending sleep the way it pretends sleep, watching the shape of it beside me in the dark, and a little after 3, the shape moved. It sat up, slowly, smoothly, without the small groans and shifts a real body makes, and it swung its legs out of the bed, and it stood there a moment in the dark, still, listening, checking, the way you check that a house is asleep, and then it walked, not toward the bathroom, not toward the kitchen, but out into the hall, and it turned, in the hall, toward the children's rooms, and it started. How stored her ways toward the handle, and its face, the spank, and the dark was blank, and its face, the specimen face, the specimen, and it said to the worm, and it said, its specimen face, the warm, sleepy, confused smile, and it said in the hall face, the warm, sleepy, confused smile, and it said in his voice, the warm, sleepy, confused smile, and it said in his voice, just getting some water, love. Did I wake you? And I said, the kitchen. I keep the children's doors locked from the inside now. I am exhausted in a way that is its own kind of unraveling. And I know how it looks. The tired, frightened wife not sleeping, checking the children, watching her husband. And I know that if I am not careful, the exhaustion itself will become the evidence against me. That a woman this worn and wild-eyed is a woman no one believes, and that this too is part of how it works. That it can simply wait and be patient. I don't know what to do. That is the honest end of this, and I am sorry it is not a triumph, not a banishing, not a rescue. I cannot fight a thing that everyone else experiences as my healthy, loving husband. I cannot leave and take the children without a reason anyone will accept. And can you imagine the custody of it? The hearing, the calm, reasonable man and his exhausted, paranoid wife who says he's been replaced from the inside? I cannot get help for a thing that no doctor will find, because there is nothing physically wrong with Daniel. He is the picture of health. It is only that he is not anymore entirely the one living in there. I can only watch and keep the children's doors locked and keep my shifts of sleepless watch and try to hold on to the certainty, my one certainty, that I am not crazy, that the man I have loved for 22 years came home wrong from a dark road in October and has been, ever since, slowly, patiently, lovingly, eaten from the inside by something that is, and that is the deadline I live under. Not a monster at the door, not a night of confrontation, just that. The day I can't tell anymore because it is getting better. The performance, closing the gaps, and there are mornings now, more of them, when I watch the thing that is my husband make the coffee in the right hand now, always the right hand now, and laugh on the beat now, and use our old shorthand now, correctly, warmly, and I feel, for a terrible moment, nothing wrong, nothing at all. Just my husband, and our kitchen in the morning light. And the moment passes, and the cold comes back, and I catch it watching me, or falling half a second short, and I know again. But the moments of nothing wrong are getting longer, and I understand that the day is coming, maybe soon, when one of those moments will not pass, when I will look at the thing wearing my husband and feel nothing wrong, and it will not come back. The knowing, and I will simply, finally, believe it, and be at peace, and be lost. Because the last of Daniel will be gone, and I will be the last. I have looked for others. In the long sleepless nights I have searched carefully in the anonymous places online where people say the things they cannot say out loud. And I have found them, a scattered few, other wives, other husbands, other mothers, all writing the same impossible sentence in slightly different words. My husband came back wrong. My wife isn't my wife. There's something behind my son's eyes since the night. And I have found it in the old stories too. The ones the folklorists collect, the very old belief in every country that a person could be taken out on a lonely road, in the woods, at a crossing, and a thing left in their place that wore their shape. And the old stories all say the same thing. The old stories had rituals, iron and fire and terrible tests, things I do not have and would not dare, things that were as likely to kill the true Daniel trapped inside as to drive the thing out. And they had, most of them, the same ending as mine is going to have, which is that the wife who knew, the mother who knew, was not believed, and did nothing in time, and the thing stayed, and wore its stolen shape out to the end of a long, ordinary life, and no one ever knew but her, and she carried it alone until she died. So this is my warning. Though I don't know how it helps you, because you cannot lock your door against this. It comes home wearing the face you love most. But if someone you love goes away for a while, an hour, a night, and comes back with a gap in the time they can't explain, with mud on their shoes and a story too smooth, watch them. Watch the small things, the hand, the timing of the laugh, the private things they should know and don't. And if you begin to feel, against all reason, that the person in your house is your person, and also is not, do not talk yourself out of it. Do not let them make you the crazy one, because you are not crazy. You know them better than anyone alive, and knowing them is the only instrument in the world that can detect this, and it is a real instrument. And guard your children at night. That is the one thing my husband spent the last of himself to tell me. Whatever it is, it wants the children. The wearing of the grown ones is only practice, only preparation, only the long, patient learning of how to be a person, close to the small ones it really wants. Lock the doors. Keep watch. Believe yourself. And if you are lying beside someone right now, in the dark, someone warm and familiar, someone you love, and you have been feeling lately that something is just slightly, unnameably wrong, then I am so sorry and I am so afraid for you. And I am with you, out here in the dark, keeping my own watch beside my own warm, familiar stranger. Watch the small things. Trust the cold feeling you cannot explain. It is not madness. It is the oldest and truest instrument you have, the knowing of the one you love, and it is telling you something real. And you are the only one who can hear it. Keep the children close. Keep the lights low, but never off. And whatever you do, on the nights when the thing beside you seems most perfectly, most lovingly itself, do not let that be the night you finally believe it. That is the night it is waiting for. Don't fall asleep first. Night.